The main character, a young girl with beautiful ruby eyes, has just woken up in a luxurious castle and expensive rooms. Back on the bed, she said, "Kabil, it's time for you to wake up. Let's go get something to eat because I'm hungry." The boy opened his eyes sleepily, not wanting to wake up yet. Kabil Cernois is one of the main characters of this novel. The young lady had not yet had time to say anything when he closed his eyes again and fell asleep. And the whole story began with the fact that this little girl, just a week ago, was completely different and was reborn into a love story thief. She was crossing the road home after yet another failed job interview, not noticing that a girl was standing nearby, alone. As she crossed the road, she heard the sharp and loud cry of a child who fell in the middle of the road when the traffic started moving. Without thinking, she ran to her, throwing the child aside, but she didn't notice how she ended up under the car. And then this happened, a rebirth. She found herself alone in a dark room, facing a choice that would determine her future, a judgment in heaven or hell, or being reborn for saving the child. Judging by the fact that you are watching this now, the choice was obvious. She woke up in a love story in the body of a 10-year-old girl who plays the main role in this work. Even in her new body, she still remained a loser, but this time a doomed villain. As for Kabil, his role is not easy either. He is the bastard of the ducal family of Cernois, who was abandoned in an orphanage at birth, and even there the adults treated him badly. And only over the years, it became clear that he was a descendant of a wealthy family, and he was forced to return to the duke's estate, after which his life became even worse. Adults, thinking they would help the boy with his childhood traumas, brought him his young wife, Elodie Maclaire, and then his affairs really got worse. Elodie abused him, doing various horrible things, and gradually took control of his entire home and servants. Remembering this, Elodie felt sick from thinking about the past that existed before she was reborn into the body of this heroine. But over time, Kabil received an order from the emperor demanding that he go to the battlefield, even when he was just a child, and there he met his true love, the princess of the Dayev kingdom. Returning from the war, he earned many awards, and also brought the princess with him, demanding a divorce from the cruel Elodie. Since she did not grant a divorce and broke the contract, he could not leave her, and she continued to abuse him and the princess, who remained to live with them. Eventually, this became enough for her, and she made a poison to get rid of the princess forever. It was supposed to turn the princess into stone. Fortunately, Kabil found out about everything before she could do anything and kicked her out of the house, after which she contracted an incurable disease. She died alone in poverty, like a true thief, with a fate that befell her, and now our heroine has been reborn in her childish body. After several unsuccessful attempts to wake the boy up, she promised to read him a story, but only if he woke up and had breakfast. He immediately woke up and got up to get ready and go with her to the kitchen. Even though a week ago he was very afraid of her, now he's starting to let her get closer to him. If she continues to sleep with him and read him stories, they should become closer, she thought. This time, she would change the plot and live slowly and calmly, raise Kabil properly, and prevent disaster from happening, and also find a cure for the deadly disease that killed the thief in her past life, so she thought. And if the divorce does happen, she will calmly accept it and leave, accepting her defeat and starting a new life. That evening, when Kabil fell asleep, she decided to plan her future. Among them were 1. To raise and prepare the boy well to send him to the battlefield. 2. To protect the house until his return. 3. To find a cure for a deadly disease. If she didn't want to let Kabil go, but as a duke, he must fight under the command of the emperor, and she can't change anything. It's not in her power to stop this war. She was moved to tears by the memory of him, because at the age of 13, he would go to war where he would mature greatly and return to her as an adult. She should also think about the duke's territory, where many magical herbs grow, and she will have to learn how to work with them to make potions. She has finally decided that she will live a long life and will not let anyone ruin her plan. And in the morning, Elodie took care of the estate documents. Since the boy was still too young for this, she had to master all the sciences early. At the same time, the butler silently watched her and could not understand how her wealthy father had given his dear daughter to such a poor bastard, especially after the boy's parents were drunkards and spent all their money and didn't take care of the estate, which is why they died because of it. And the successor was to be Kabil's cousin, a wicked and envious man, and the butler didn't want that, which is why he was looking for a boy. He only knew that his mother was a servant of the duke and tried for a long time to find her, but accidentally came across Kabil in a shelter. But because of the terrible treatment of the boy in this shelter, he was afraid of all adults, and that is why the butler also found a bride for the young duke. The girl's father did not hesitate to give her up and signed a contract, promising not to interfere in her life. Therefore, the butler kindly took care of both children. In the documents, Elodie learned that the former owners were very wealthy, and the first duke was a war hero who personally conquered vast territories. But because of Kabil's father, the former duke, everything they had accumulated over the years was lost, and now they have huge financial problems. However, from a past life, she remembered that there were gold coins hidden in the estate. She decided that she would find them, and that was how she would solve their problem and pay off all their debts. First, she decided to start training Kabil and ordered the butler to find a fencing teacher so that he could start right away. She took care of him as best she could, and even forbade him from eating too many sweets, because they were harmful. She played games with him, they went out a lot, and she taught him what she knew. She also forbade him to call her by her first name, but only to call her Mrs., teaching him etiquette. He fell in love with her, which she didn't expect at all, and one day he hugged her so tightly, telling her that he liked her. Kabil dreamed of her staying with him forever. He didn't want to let her go or trade her for another. Later, Crybaby, whose fencing teacher Elodie hired, appeared in their lives. He agreed to teach until he saw the young duke, saying that he was a coward, and it would be difficult, doubting whether he could teach him anything. Elodie didn't like this, so she explained the whole situation to him and ordered him to start training immediately, because one day the duke would lead their army. She tried to calm Kabil down by explaining that the coach was very good, and she would always be there for him. While the young duke studied combat, she spent her time reading potions books and studying herbs. One thing was clear to her: brewing a potion wasn't as difficult as finding all the herbs for it. After that, she started thinking about the greenhouse. If she had gotten the hidden money, she could have built one, and then grown herbs and sold potions to make back the money. Because she was busy with her book, she didn't notice how brutally the trainer fought, which upset Kabil. Seeing his tears, she became angry and attacked Crybaby, shouting, as if he could do such a thing to a little boy. She took Kabil in her arms and sent the coach home because she was angry with his action. After buying the boy, she helped him undress into his pajamas, but one thought kept haunting her. What happened to him in the past, and why does he have so many scars? She sympathized with him and didn't want to ask questions so as not to traumatize him again. The boy was crying in pain. His hands were injured from today's lesson, but he tried not to show it. She understood how little she knew about him and tried to explain that it was normal to cry and that if you were in pain, you didn't need to hide it. The educators at the shelter beat him for showing his emotions, which is why he became like this and didn't understand how to live any other way. Elodie smeared cream on his hands and told him that the adults who had insulted him were worthless. She promised him that she would find everyone who had wronged him and take revenge on them, asking if he remembered them. The young duke told her everything, and they drew a picture of those scoundrels, and then fell asleep. The nanny came into the room to check if everything was okay, and saw them sleeping soundly, with a drawing next to them that she thought was just a child's imagination. While Elodie slept and saw those scoundrels in her dreams, and imagined how she would punish them for every tear he shed. The next morning, she brought the butler to the former duke's office to show him the treasures she had found, pretending to have found them by accident. The butler burst into tears. He could not believe that this young lady would be able to bring prosperity to their estate. Next, she ordered them to take some of the money to strengthen the army in order to prepare for the upcoming war with the enemy. Since the army needed a commander, and Kabil was still young for one, she appointed Crybaby to lead their army, train it, and care for it. This, of course, shocked him. He was afraid of this position and said that he couldn't even train the duke, and there was a large army here. He argued that he was too busy for that, but the young lady is not an ordinary girl and was able to give him an answer, noting that he cannot be busy when he has neither a wife nor children, and even less a lover. He was devastated by this, so there was nowhere to run, and he agreed to lead the army for the sake of the future duke. Afterwards, she spent time with Kabil, reading him stories and giving him cookies. He liked it so much that he asked if they could live in a house like in a fairy tale, made of candy. The lady just glared at him, saying no, scary giant ants live in sweet houses. It seems that the former villain has awakened in her. This shattered the boy's dream and scared him terribly. He didn't expect her to be so cruel. She just apologized for ruining his childhood dreams and, looking at the boy, thought that he probably loved sweets so much because he had never tried them in the orphanage, but she still had to control what he ate. She looked at him for a long time and asked him to stand up. Then she said, "I think you've grown a little. They say that children grow at night." They walked together to the wall, and then she took a pen and measured his height. It seems that he really grew up. Now they will celebrate his growth every year. When he grows up, he will be taller than her, she told him. The heroine recalled that in the original story, Kabyle was described as the tallest, handsome man that all women dreamed of. Elodie daydreamed, thinking about him and what he would grow up to be. Then he asked, "Isn't that right, madam? Why are you looking at me like that?" She said, "Nothing, you're just very handsome." Then the boy became embarrassed. He blushed and said that when he grows up and becomes big and adult, he will also hug her so tightly. But immediately, the young lady became sad and remembered that when he grew up, he would only hug his princess. They hugged for a long time. He was just enjoying his time with his beloved girlfriend, and she was thinking about how when he went to war, she would no longer be able to measure his height for 10 years. The next morning, the butler came to the lady to ask how they planned to celebrate their birthday, since their birthdays are close enough and they can celebrate them together. She agreed and said she liked the idea of a party. After this joyful moment, she remembered that when she lived with her father, he never celebrated his children's birthdays, and Elodie was never close to other children, and her mother was cold to her. All of this meant that she would finally have her own party. At that moment, the little prince asked her, "What is a birthday?" Then she began to explain to him that it is the day you were born, and that it is a good day, all of it. And she also told him that on this day, he would receive a lot of delicious food and the best gifts. And then she thought about the conditions Kabyle lived in. It turns out he never celebrated his birthday either. Looking at him and how quickly he learned, she thought what to give him. He was still a child, so she could give him a toy. Elodie knew several ancient languages, which she taught the boy so that he would become the best swordsman. Since the swordmaster uses his mother to create an aura, the better a person's innate mana control, the easier it is to learn the ancient language, and therefore the male has a very high level of control. And if she teaches Kabyle the ancient language now, it will help him in the future. A huge cake was already on the table. Friends and servants gathered around the table. They clapped loudly and cheered for the children. Elodie wore a very beautiful dress, and everyone was simply delighted. They immediately began exchanging gifts. Elodie prepared a very large, beautiful gift for Kabyle that she had made herself. He was happy because there was a little pink rabbit there. Then it was the gentleman's turn to exchange gifts for Elodie. She was shocked that Kabyle had also prepared a gift for her. When she opened the box, she saw a little note with the candy, saying that she hoped she would like the gift. Time passed quickly, and a year had already passed. She was 14, and Kabyle was 8. The butler came to see her because he thought the estate needed more servants. She agreed and told him to take care of it. For the last year of sorbet, you have led the knights very well. Thanks to him, they had the best soldiers. The maids were burdened with cooking for the knights, so they needed more staff. A few days ago, for the first time, Kabyle stood confidently before the audience, like their master. It was a wonderful initiation ceremony for new knights, where she held Kabyle's hand while he stood there nervously. Although he was worried, he conducted the ceremony with dignity. Also, the repairmen were due to arrive the next day to begin construction. She decided to use some of the remaining gold to repair the greenhouse, and she would build laboratories next to it. Also that day, she decided to take Kabyle for a walk to the market. The boy was so used to being with her that he didn't want to be too far away from her anymore. I hope he won't ask her to go with him to the battlefield. Elodie decided to practice magic. To do this, she had to go to the market and buy herbs from traveling merchants. Although she collected many herbs and samples from the fields and forests, it was still not enough. To get samples from other regions, she needed the things that these traders brought. Taking the boy by the hand, they walked to the carriage outside. Their faithful chief of guard also went with them to guarantee the young prince's safety. They saw the country in a merchant who sold perfume. Then they decided to buy this perfume for themselves, but not a special one, but an ordinary one, in order to study it. There were so many people in the market that they couldn't even get through. They would be separated by people. She tried to take his hand, but he was too far away. When the herd of people left, they saw that the boy was gone and started looking for him. He got lost in one of the dark streets, where other boys found him. They were very angry. These guys knew he was rich, so they decided to scare him and catch him. They wanted to steal everything he had. When he started screaming, Elodie heard him and ran up behind him. The boys just laughed when they saw her, but she threatened them and said that if they even touched him with a finger, then they would not live. She called on the boy to defend himself. Cable ran to her and hugged her tightly. She clung to her, trembling with fear. Elodie asked the boys how they knew the boy, and they answered that they lived with him in the shelter, and that he is the same coward and hides behind the girl's skirt. She couldn't stand the bullying towards the boy and shouted, ordering them to be quiet. The expression on her face scared them at first, but they didn't give up and told her that she was a weakling who was acting like a hero. At that moment, Sir Betos found them, ran up and asked if they were okay and if they needed help. But before he could finish, he saw a young lady who herself was not doing too badly with the two older boys who were screaming for mercy and for her to let them go. He looked at everything that was happening for a long time, and Elodie said that he was just in time to help her, and at that time, she was holding the robber by the hair. Seeing the knight, the boys ran away. Betos thought of catching up with them, but Elodie assured them that everything was fine and let them run. During the conversation, she noticed something shining under her feet, and when she picked it up, she saw a brooch that looked like a real artifact. Betos thought it was worth keeping, and apparently, this brooch fell into the hands of the guys who stole it from someone. And it was at this phrase that a handsome tanned man approached them. He asked if they had seen the two young red-haired boys who had stolen his brooch. Without thinking twice, Elodie showed her find to her husband and handed it to him, for which he was very grateful. The biggest surprise for them was to see the man start crying as he hugged this precious thing, because it was a memento of his mother. In his joy, he decided to meet the girl who saved him. It turned out that he was the head of the Rondia Merchant Guild, and he was in debt to Elodie. Without thinking twice, she decided to seize the moment. Refusing the gift, the only thing she asked for was to visit their home. And she introduced the young duke to their estate of Cernois, and all because she was worried about her potions that she wanted to sell later, and so she found a way. The evening on the estate was not peaceful. A strong thunderstorm began. The wind beat tree branches against the windows. Kabyle was already asleep and had a terrible dream about his childhood in the orphanage, where he was being bullied. A huge man with a stick stood over him. He looked at him in fear and cried, apologizing that he didn't want to cause them any problems. Elodie came to the scream from the bedroom and saw a frightened Cable sleeping and having a terrible dream. She woke him up, which scared him even more, and he didn't expect to see a young lady in front of him. She stood there all so beautiful, but told him that everyone would leave him again because he deserved it. Now he woke up for real and realized that it was all just a terrible dream. But when he opened his eyes, he didn't see Elodie next to him. He got out of bed and started calling her, but when he didn't hear an answer, he started crying. At that moment, Elodie came in and asked with a smile if he had finally woken up. She had heard thunder and so came to check on him. He hugged her tightly, afraid of losing his beloved friend, and begged her not to leave him. To somehow calm the boy down, she came up with a game. Putting a candle on the floor and lighting the room, she began to make shadows on the wall. Kabyle was happy and calmed down. He enjoyed spending time with her. After the games, they finally went to bed. Elodie fell asleep, but the only thing Kabyle could think about was why she was so kind to him. In the morning, Elodie had a lot to do. First thing she did, as usual, was to visit the maids, but she was furious that Kabyle was following her everywhere. Between the maids' conversations, she heard about a medicinal herb, which interested her greatly, and she began to ask more questions. An idea light bulb went off in her, so she came up with a new job for the servants. Within minutes, she sent the girls and Kabyle in search of this herb. The maid Anna knew about these herbs and helped Elodie, but whatever the girl found, thinking it was a spiritual herb, the maid threw it away and said it was a weed. Elodie spent hours examining each bush and trying to distinguish them. So they decided to taste it. It turned out that the spiritual herb was very bitter, which is how they found it. Tired, they sat talking about herbs. Elodie wanted to learn as much as possible about them. No wonder she was a fan of the herbalist's monologue. From the maid's stories, she understood that magicians were exterminated a long time ago, so the only ones who possess potions are priests, who are very difficult to find. All she had to do was read and ask people, and also finish building a greenhouse in which to grow these herbs. A wonderful sunny day, A week later, the greenhouse was finished, and Elodie was already sitting in it, working. Tired but satisfied, she finally finished what she had started so long ago. Her first magic potion was ready. After trying dozens of recipes, she made a painkiller that was no longer bitter due to the herb and had a quick effect. Since most medicines on the market are potions, the pill she invented would be much better. She even tried the pill when she got hurt and really didn't feel any pain. Elodie was very pleased with the result and decided it was time to test the medicine on someone else. The girl walked around the estate asking the servants if they needed medicine, but one maid suggested she try it on the knights, who often hurt each other during training. Elodie, in the company of the young prince, entered the training hall. As soon as the knights saw her, they began to worry because they knew how she yelled at them for cleanliness and order. They stood anxiously, wondering what she wanted from them this time. Would she really raise them like little boys again? But she came to ask them if anyone was hurt, and at that moment, Lady Sola, who loved her very much, approached her in a friendly manner. She brought to Elodie one of the knights who had been badly injured during the previous training. It turned out that he was her boyfriend, whom she often beats, as funny as it may sound. With disbelief, he took one and prayed to the lady that it was not poison. This made his beloved Sola laugh, who said that she was ready to drink poison from Elodie's hands. She made him swallow the pill, which greatly comforted the princess, who was waiting for his reaction to the medicine. To his surprise, the medicine really helped, and his shoulder stopped hurting, but Elodie assured him that it was just painkillers and not a full-fledged medicine, and was angry that he didn't trust her right away. But she was distracted by the knight Sola, who was delighted with the lady's talent and asked to hug her or kiss her, which confused her boyfriend behind her. Sir Bedos also praised the lady, after all. It was not in vain that she spent days and nights in the laboratory studying potions, and only Kabyle stood silently on the sidelines, watching what was happening. Somewhere deep inside, he was happy for her success. A few days later, one of the merchants they had rescued visited them. He drank tea and enjoyed the young lady's company. She decided to take the opportunity and reminded him of his debt to her. She asked him for a small favor. The lady presented him with her new product, painkillers, which she would like to sell through the Rondia market. He stared at the jar for a long time and didn't expect anything magical because he didn't think a child could make potions. It was more like candy. But Elodie assured him that it was a strong medicine that magically took away all the pain from them. Shocked, he couldn't believe what he had heard. What kind of child could brew potions, and even with the help of magic? And she was happy with the thought that if the market owner himself tested her pills, it would definitely be the best product on the market with a proven effect. He swallowed one pill to see if it would relieve the pain from his cut finger, and wow, it stopped hurting! Impressed by such a quick result, he was ready to accept Elodie's offer and offered to put up the highest price for such magic. But Elodie refused, saying that she wanted her medicine to be available to anyone who couldn't see a doctor and wanted to somehow relieve the pain. The merchant doubted this decision because he would like to earn some money, but could not refuse. After all, he was her debtor. She also assured him that while they were talking, a new batch of potion was already being prepared, so there would be no problems with the limit. It's no wonder that Elodie, although young, is already so brilliant and manages the entire estate and servants. The merchant was happy because it meant they would be able to bring in money all the time. But Elodie was not stupid and immediately asked him about the money, because he was not the only merchant who would want to take these medicines for himself. He agreed to her cunning bet and was willing to give her as much money as she wanted, just so she would cooperate with him. She was ready for such a bargain, so she prepared a trade agreement in advance and gave it to him for review. With such a proposal, he realized that this was a hopeless situation and that she was more cunning than him, and if he did not play by the rules, the contract would be terminated. He was ashamed that he had doubted her and thought he could still make money from her invention, so he apologized and shook her hand. The merchant wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Kabyle spoke up, forbidding Elodie from touching him and staring intently at the man. Elodie tried to calm him down, but he continued to look at the man with bitterness. The girl was simply beaming with happiness. She knew about her success, but didn't think it would go better than she expected. In her joy, she hugged Kabyle and assured him that he had nothing to worry about, and that soon she would make him very rich. For some time now, Elodie was riding horses, hearing praise for her riding talent. Lady Sola did not hide her admiration for the young lady and assured her that soon she would be able to participate in horse races. While Kabyle stood aside and watched them, Elodie approached and offered him her hand so that he could also ride. He was afraid, but Elodie insisted that one day he would find himself on the battlefield and would have to saddle a horse. While they were discussing this, the butler ran up to them, shouting about the problem, that the Count of Bologna had arrived. It was he who was disliked the most by Elodie, the Count who was Kabyle's uncle, and hated the boy. Unlike the previous Count, this one was a real scumbag who only wanted enrichment and fame. From a young age, he was known as the worst scumbag who dealt in drugs, gambling, and much more. And before the late Duke died, he strictly ordered that the Duchy of Cernois would never ever pass into the hands of the Count of Bologna. That is why the butler was so diligently searching for the young master, Kabyle, because he was afraid that the Count would find out everything as soon as he came to power. The butler knew that the Count would try to intimidate the young master, and Elodie, in order to take possession of what he believed belonged to him. The old man sat in the great hall and squinted at everything around him, believing that these children were incapable of anything, and in general, a servant's bastard as a successor was stupid, he thought. He dreamed, sitting in his chair, about how he would become an aristocrat as soon as he took possession of this duchy. Then everyone would be at his feet. The beautiful Elodie and the young ruler entered the hall, with serious faces, but so beautifully dressed. Elodie pretended to be glad to see him, and greeted him, but the Count just shook his head and began to claim that they were nobody here, and that this was his property. Kabyle, regardless, also greeted him, although he was not happy about this pointless meeting. Elodie wanted to speed up this meeting, so she got straight to the point and asked why he had come. To which the Count replied that he did not need a reason to come to the estate that should belong to him. The children simply ignored these words and continued drinking tea, pretending not to have heard anything, which further irritated the Count. He puffed out his fat cheeks, calling them narcissistic bastards who deserved nothing and had no right to behave like owners. The children continued to look at him as if he were a fool, claiming that they had received official permission from the emperor. To which the Count of Bologna replied that this was not enough, and in order to obtain the permission of the vassals, she must send money to his county, and perhaps he would help her. Elodie got bored with his stupid talk and decided to teach him a lesson, saying that she didn't owe him anything, and he was behaving like a child who was constantly crying. But she added that she would file a lawsuit if he continued to bother them, and here she managed to scare him. He wanted to say something more, but she interrupted him. Since she had heard that he was going to the capital, she might as well deliver the official letter to the court, where they would deal with him. As soon as this fool opened his mouth and started yelling at Elodie, Kabyle stood up for her and shut that shit up. And since that shithead was already completely impudent, he raised his hand to hit the guy, but even then he was stopped. Elodie stood in front of him and shouted at the Count to get out, stating that she was expelling him because she had the authority of the Duchess. He thought she was joking, but the girl called Norman and ordered the bastard to be thrown out for threatening the young Duke. Norman told the Count that it was time for him to leave the house, as the Duke had more important matters to attend to than chatting with him, and insisted that he would see that the Count left them. He quickly started walking towards the door, because Elodie had called the knights to help the Count get out as quickly as possible. The scumbag decided that he wouldn't leave them so easily, and decided that he would take revenge as soon as he could. Within a few days, they were on their way, a warm, sunny day, and an escort of several knights. And all because she had been thinking for a long time about the words of the Count and the vassals who controlled parts of her county. It was time to check how the people in these territories were doing. When the emperor recognized Kabyle as his successor, the vassals were supposed to come and express their loyalty to him, but since that happened, she had not seen anyone. She could understand that they didn't want to accept a bastard, but they could still show at least a little respect for the successor the emperor himself had recognized. Elodie recalls that in a past life, they only became loyal to him when Kabyle returned from war with great glory. Also in the original story, Elodie plotted against Kabyle along with her vassals, but that's all in the past. For some reason, she felt uneasy just thinking about it. When they entered the city, she fell silent from the beauty. It was luxurious. However, Kabyle did not share her delight and looked at everything with boredom. They made their first stop, and the girl wanted to go and see a nearby farm and took a horse from the officer. On the way, sitting two on horseback, They rode along the road, accompanied by officers for their own safety. They made short stops, and Elodie showed Kabyle his lands. Rich in mountains, grain, and forests, he is still young and does not quite understand everything that belongs to him, and that he has great power. Once upon a time, all these lands were conquered by the first duke in the course of war, a very distant ancestor of Kabyle. She taught him that he must protect and govern all these possessions, as well as protect the people who live on them. It is his duty to provide these people with a good life, and most importantly, not to let them starve. Suddenly, Elodie began to stare intently at all these possessions, wondering why they were managing their household the way they did. Norman noticed that the Duchess was thoughtful and asked what interested her so much. It was all about the fields and how people divided the farm. She was interested in why people don't plant turnips and clover. If their fields get tired quickly, then these are the plants that can restore the land. Elodie reasoned that people have little interest in science and therefore do not know how to develop the economy. She was once again convinced that the nobles had no business with the farmers, which is why the fields were not developing and were not bringing in profit. Thanks to Elodie's arrival in the neighboring villages and her training for the farmers, they began to plant turnips and clover, so the harvest grew as expected, and the farmers' lives improved. At this pace, several seasons passed, and 1 year remained before receiving the royal decree to go to war against Kabyle. The morning began with news from the maid. A new strange plant had grown again. Recently, strange new plants have begun to grow in the greenhouse, which neither Elodie nor the plant expert knew anything about. Surprisingly, the girl remembered some of the plants from her past life, but these memories didn't come to her so often anymore. She was tired from spending too much time researching, so she asked the maids to prepare the room so she could rest. Over these few seasons, she has prepared new potions. In addition to the painkiller, she has created new drugs that stop bleeding, various ointments, and other pills. She was able to earn some money from them, but her main goal was to create effective medicines for the upcoming war to save Kabyle, during which time she managed to prepare him well. Now he is constantly training with the knights and is already in very good shape. Therefore, Elodie asked the maid to prepare food for them. From the day he decided to become a grown man, he asked Elodie to come less often so that he wouldn't be distracted from his studies. Well, they hadn't seen each other for almost 3 years, and the only thing left for her to do was remember their childhood when he wanted to be with her so much. She thought she now understood what it felt like when a mother sent her child off to school. He was already so grown up and probably wasn't afraid of anyone. After a busy evening, she sat with tea and read the news in the newspaper. One of the news items was about the beginning of the temple's entry into the war, and that the war that was about to begin would be on the eastern continent in the Earth Empire. She recalls how at that time, they happily hunted people who renounced the Tisser religion, which was believed by most of the inhabitants of the continent of Phria. And one by one they entered the small neighboring countries and began to kill priests and magicians, thinking that this would take their mana for power. And it is in this war that Kabyle must unleash his potential against the Earth Empire, revealing his power and mana. The confused maid asked the lady if everything was okay, because she was too tense reading the newspaper and immersed in her memories. She also said she had heard about another priest who had disappeared, and how much longer would these savages continue this violence. At first glance, the Empire and the Temple appeared to be allies, but in reality their relationship was far from good. The Emperor had long wanted war with Orta, which was rapidly conquering foreign lands, but the Temple did not agree with the Empire's orders and opposed the war. And it was in this split in the alliance that it was Kabyle who led both to victory and ended this war. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by Kabyle, who came running from training. Missing her, he ran with a smile into her arms. In these 3 years, they have already changed so much. Kabyle has matured, and Elodie has become even more beautiful and older. To distract herself, Elodie visited the library and found a book on the history of the county of Cernoy, hoping to find some useful information for the upcoming war. It turned out that the first duke won the war with the help of an artifact endowed with magic. It was then that she remembered the brooch she had seen in one of the paintings. It was supposed to be passed down to Kabyle by inheritance, but for some reason she had not seen it yet. Taking this into account, she decided to look for this brooch again. It would be very helpful in the upcoming war. Then a thought came to her. She had once found a chest of gold under the table. Maybe there was something else there. So, just in case, she went to check the office again under each desk. If she was lucky, she might find something. Her instincts were right. There was a small chest there, and to her surprise, in addition to coins and rubies, there was also an artifact. I barely managed to find it when I was already upset because I didn't see the glow from the stone. If it were magical, it would shine. She was about to close the chest when suddenly a choice arose before her. A strange, glowing window suggested that she use one hidden object. Out of fear, she agreed, and a phoenix feather fell out. Suddenly, the bright light became even stronger, blinding her, and within a minute, an artifact was in her hands, sparkling with an expensive radiance, radiating power. She was glad that Kabila would need it when he went to war, and continued to examine it more closely. The day passed like this. In the evening, she and Cable were resting in bed, holding hands. He couldn't sleep as usual and thought about her, her kindness and care. Thanks to her, he wasn't afraid of anyone anymore. But lately, she seemed strange to him. He was worried about why she was talking to him as if they were going to break up soon. It scared him because he thought they would always be together. He closed his eyes and squeezed her hand tighter, trying not to think about her wanting to leave him. And so another year passed. Norman arrived early in the morning with a letter for the Duke of Kabil with an order from the Emperor. The day came when Kabyle was drafted into the Imperial Army. Even though she knew this day would come soon, she was still sad, and Kabil was even more confused. After reading the letter, he shouted that he didn't want to go and that Elodie shouldn't force him. She was even more upset because she really didn't want to let him go, but she couldn't do anything else. The only thing she could do was hug him tightly. To calm him down, she promised that she would eagerly await his return. She asked him to leave and return safe and sound. Time passed very quickly, and now the day of departure had arrived. A few days ago, he was crying next to Elodie, and now he stands bravely next to his army, not showing weakness before the knights. She came to see him off on his journey, and she brought something magical to help him on his way, his family's magical brooch. Elodie leaned over to wish him luck and that he would stay healthy and return to her as soon as possible. She gave him the letter, but asked him to open it later. He took the letter and held it closer to him, smelling the perfume of his beloved Duchess. To ensure his safety, she ordered Sir Bedos to watch over Kabil and bring him back unharmed. She already knew that the war would last for about 10 years. It would take several seasons just to get to the mountains where the war was taking place. The knights were leaving the duchy, and she watched them as they got further and further away from home. Kabil must return grown and war-trained to rule his duchy. At least she has done everything for his success. And unfortunately for her, she knew that he would not return alone, but with the princess, and Elodie would have to accept his decision. Several months have passed since Kabil left, and spring has set in. The girl has completely immersed herself in experiments and work. She tried to find something to do to distract herself from her thoughts about the boy. And not only her, but her servants often spent time with her. What pleased her most was that alongside the knights were mages who could use healing magic for the wounded. During her experiments, she was lucky enough to grow wild ginseng seeds, which had a significant impact on her experiments. She produced another medicine, red pills, which she immediately sent to the merchant guild and sold throughout the territory. She should have started other projects to develop magic in their territories, but lately she'd been feeling even more lonely. If it hadn't tried to improve people's lives, there would still be many areas with poor living standards and poverty. And also, in a conversation with Norman, she mentioned the shelter where Kabil once lived, and as it turned out, it was located partly near their territory, where no one controlled it. Fired up by the idea, she told the butler to prepare the carriages for the journey. That's when she decided the time had come. It was time to take on a horrible orphanage where children were being abused. Out of respect for the baron who owned those lands, she didn't cause a conflict over the shelter, but today she is determined. When she was about to get into the carriage, a young knight approached her and handed her a bouquet of flowers. She smiled awkwardly and appreciated his action, thanking the knight. But at one point, when she looked at the bouquet, she remembered a day from the past when Kabil was still little and picked flowers for her, which made her very happy. At that moment, she felt sad looking at these beautiful flowers, which reminded her of Kabil, and she immediately wondered how he was doing. Arriving at the scene, she stepped out of the carriage, very determined to act. A man in a terrible appearance, unkempt and rude, immediately came up to them and asked if they wanted to adopt a child. However, looking at the building, She couldn't understand how children could live in such a dilapidated house, but she didn't object to her husband and asked to show the children. This shithead was only interested in one thing: why a rich woman like her in a luxurious dress came to them and asked about the children. But still he did not refuse and led them to the children. When Elodie saw the conditions the children were living in, she was simply horrified. How is this even possible? Even livestock don't live in such conditions. Butler Norman immediately remembered the day he came to pick up Kabyle, and it wasn't as terrible then as it is now. She scolded that shithead why the children were so skinny and hungry when he was so rude. He tried to justify himself somehow, but it was all in vain. Angry, she ordered him to go get the director, and he could not resist and followed her order. A very elegant woman, dressed in an expensive dress, came out to her. This made her have even more questions about the poor children. The director asked the girl if she was looking for a specific child, a boy or a girl, but Elodie was interested in a boy from 6 years ago. When she began to describe Kabyle to her, a boy with black hair and pink eyes, thin and small, the principal just smiled at this and said that they had too many children, and that's why she couldn't remember a specific boy. Elodie got angry and shouted, "You had so many children that you tortured and starved." The director denied everything, claiming that these were just rumors, and not about them, but about another shelter where the children were well cared for. But Elodie had solid evidence, a drawing of Kabyle when he was little. In it, he depicted a shithead and his bitchy director. Now they wouldn't be able to deny the fact. These two idiots just stared at the drawing with stupid eyes, at first feigning surprised faces. But the director continued to play the fool and pretended not to understand anything, saying that it was a stupid joke. But it was hard to tell from Elodie's face that she was joking. Looking very seriously into their faces, she saw no shame in them at all. And as soon as she pointed her finger at this fat fool, the officer instantly put his sword to his neck, frightening him, and Elodie wanted him to admit guilt for beating Kabyle the most. She continued to say in a calm voice that the current owner of the land they live on is the very boy they had bullied so much. As soon as the director wanted to object, one of the maids ran into the room and shouted, "They're here!" Behind her were officers slowly ascending the stairs to the room. As soon as they entered, they immediately caught these scumbags who were doing such terrible things to the children. No matter how much the principal denied her actions, nothing would help her. Elodie laughed when she heard the director talking about her rights and that no one could arrest the girl. Laughing, Elodie said that now she was the owner of these lands, so she had every right to do this to the scumbags who were mocking Kabyle. But another problem remained. Who would take care of the children who were now left all alone on the streets? And then the Duchess had her own plan. She would build a new orphanage where everyone would be taken care of, so she ordered the children to be sent there and the roomers to look after them. She thanked Sir Therion separately for his escort. He only smiled and refused to thank her, saying it was his duty to look after her. In such joy, she ordered Norman that from this day on, there would be no more poverty and slums in their lands. Her face finally showed peace and joy for the revenge she had accomplished. Maybe this would finally bring peace to Kabyle when he found out. She silently looked up at the sky. That evening, Kabyle looked up at the sky and read the letter. Sitting by the fire in the middle of the forest, he reread each line for a long time and remembered her face. He cried from the memories, but he wiped his tears away in an instant because he could not afford this weakness. He had to remain strong to win this war and return to his Duchess. Dark forest. The knights fell silent among the bushes, listening to the rustling around them. Someone also hid, waiting to attack the knights. Suddenly, an army of goblins appeared out of nowhere, green and ugly with large clubs ready for battle. A terrible fight began. The knights defended themselves as best they could, but the goblins continued to attack. Fortunately for Kabyle, there were many knights, and they protected him while he froze in fear and confusion. This was the first time he had seen monsters, and of course he was scared and could do nothing. The sword in his hands was trembling, and Sir Bedos noticed it. Out of nowhere, a goblin ran past Bedos with the intention of attacking the young duke. He seemed like a weak prey to them. Kabyle froze when one of the goblins was a meter away from him. The monster, with a club raised above its head, was ready to strike the duke, but Kabyle's reaction was faster than ever, and he cut the goblin in half with his longsword. The knights looked at their master with delight. They had won this battle, but they had not yet won the Great War. Kabyle ordered Bedos to line up their army and set off. He wanted to cross this magical forest full of monsters as quickly as possible. Within a few days, they had set up a new camp in the middle of a clearing and made a stop. They were making preparations to set off in a few days. Bedos came to the host's tent to check on him. At that time, the boy was polishing his sword, and as it turned out, he still received a small injury. The goblin managed to scratch him, and so Bedos brought him medicine. Kabul took one of the pills that Elodie had left for them. Noting that this was the first time since he had lived in the orphanage that he had seen his own blood. Thanks to the girl's care, he had not harmed himself. Even despite the wound and Bedos's refusal, the boy still decided to go to training, wanting to practice with the sword more. He had his own reasons for doing so. People gossiped a lot about the boy, that the king had gone too far by taking the child into battle. The officials did not believe that the child could lead the knights, and they only sentenced him to death. There were even rumors that the emperor and the Count of Bologna had made a pact for the boy's life. If he died, his uncle would receive all of Kabile's property. That's why the boy trained every day. The weak die in battle, and he needed to return to Elodie whole and brave to protect her too. Kabul finally realized that he had no right to lose if he wanted to return to his wife, and the sooner he conquered the kingdom, the sooner he would see her. He trained alone for a long time, but Bedos came to stop him so that the boy could rest a little. After all, he is still so young and needs a few years to grow up and become strong. Evening came quickly. The knights slept in their tents after a hard day and training. It was too quiet around, no sound of leaves or monsters. Kabul also lay in his bed in the warm tent. He dozed, but his thoughts did not leave him about the ghosts he had heard about from the knights at dinner. He returned to the edge of the bed, covered himself with the blanket, and shook with fear, although he tried not to think about it, because it was just a stupid children's horror story. As soon as he took a breath, a voice came from behind him and asked, "Kabyle Cernois, do you wish to gain more power?" His eyes instantly opened. He sat up in bed looking around, but there was no one. He was alone in the room. Then, a voice came from somewhere. Is Kabyle going crazy from loneliness? When he lowered his head, he saw a strange shine on his brooch. Could it be that Kabyle had gone mad and the brooch was really talking to him? Or maybe it was another of Elodie's magical artifacts, he thought. The voice spoke again, asking if Kabyle could hear it, and if he wanted to become stronger. He placed his hand on the brooch, thinking. But the next words that came out interested him. The voice offered him such power that he would never be afraid of anyone. They would start to fear him. Then he understood for sure that the magical ornament was talking. He asked what it was and how it knew about him, to which the ornament replied that it was glad to finally talk to him, and asked where that beautiful girl with pink hair was. The ornament owed her its life, because after years in the chest it began to lose its power. Elodie gave it a new life. The magical thing wanted to know why it was in the hands of a boy and not a girl, because it was Elodie who saved it and owed her her strength. Kabyle said that his wife had given him this thing. The magic stone replied that it felt the power, and therefore the boy was the successor of the Cernois family. Once upon a time, a magical beast chose the first Cernois and shared its power with whoever made a pact with it. If Kabyle wants to gain power, he must sign a magical pact. The magic stone wanted to do this already, but Kabyle ordered it to close because he was planning to go to bed now. And in general, his wife told him not to trust strangers, especially magical ones. It's morning. The sun is already starting to warm up, and Kabyle is training hard, talking to a magical ornament that keeps pestering him all morning with questions about a contract for power, which the boy refuses. This thing convinced him of the incredible power he would gain once he signed the contract, and blah blah blah. Kabyle ordered him to shut up again. From that day on, the brooch constantly reminded him of the contract that would make him powerful, and that's why he went around every day very, very angry. One day, he got so fed up with it that he finally asked what would happen if he signed the contract anyway. Under the condition, Cernoa's blood will be able to use natural mana, increasing his power from this, which he must give to the magical ornament. Kabul was just getting angry. He wasn't a fool to train and give his strength to someone. It sounded like he was the only one who would lose in this deal. Broshka convinced him that this was not the case, that if the thing became strong, then so would the boy. So he argued that it was beneficial for both, especially if he became a swordmaster. If this happens, the magical beast sitting in this stone will finally be able to break free and regain its body and strength as it once was. After listening to all this, Kabyle again ordered him to shut his mouth because he still did not like such a treaty. The magic stone was completely at a loss as to how one could refuse such an offer just because his wife told him so. He was a fool or something. Then a new plan emerged. The brooch asked the guy if he wanted to return to his wife, even if it was a day or a year earlier. He convinced them that the treaty was the best solution to return faster, that without magic, the war could not be won so quickly. Kabil began to listen to the magician, who promised to return him home quickly without deception, or the magician would die if he did not conclude a contract. He promised that he would not be able to leave the boy, even when he became a full-fledged spirit, because he would be faithful only to him. The boy thought for a long time before agreeing. The Duke is ready to agree only if the spirit agrees to sign the contract on paper and not verbally. Otherwise, he will not believe it. When the magician doubted how the young man knew this, he of course learned it from his wife. In the evening, they wrote a contract with all the obligations and conditions. When the deed was done, the magician finally calmed down. He shone even brighter and introduced himself as Ifrit, the spirit of the Fire King, and ordered the boy to repeat his name. When Kabil spoke the name Ifrit, everything shone and the pact was made. The boy felt the warmth and power of the stone flow through his blood, and the stone in front of him began to shine brighter and heat up. He closed his eyes from the bright light and only felt something soft fall on his nose and tickle it. It was feathers that were falling everywhere. Spreading his wings, he purred. Kabil opened his eyes and saw a small, strange creature, so cute and strange with wings and a long tail. This pretty little animal raised its paw, shouting that he was the king of spirits, Lord Ifrit the Almighty. This made Kabil laugh a lot. He took Ifrit in his arms and laughed that he felt deceived by the little magical cat with wings. But he looked like that because he didn't have enough strength. Soon everything would change, he promised. The boy exhaled in disbelief, wondering if he could trust Ifrit, a being who feeds on mana and becomes stronger at its expense. Right now, he lacked his wife's wise advice. 4 more long years passed like this. In the morning, Elodie was playing with the little children in the yard of the house. The maid who came running said that it was time to go. Elodie smiled and was happy, asked to wait in the carriage. She would be there soon. The girl, who didn't want to say goodbye to Elodie, gave her flowers that matched her dress so well. Elodie smiled and thanked the girl Daisy, stroked her hair, and told her to take care of herself and the children until she returned to them. She walked happily around the castle, breathing in the scent of flowers on the way to the carriage, but something suddenly interrupted her joy. She felt something strange in her hands. The flowers fell from her hands and trembled. She raised her fingers and looked at them. At that moment, what she feared most began. A disease that turns the body into stone. She felt its manifestation. But why now? If in the original story, Elodie tried to poison the princess with a potion that turns her into stone. And as punishment for this, she herself was struck by an incurable disease with the same symptoms and died. In the novel, the symptoms only appeared when Cable returned, and she was exiled from the kingdom. So why did this disease manifest itself now? Her biggest fear is that if this disease appeared now, she could die before her lover returned. From that day on, she immediately began to search for medicines and herbs for this disease. Every day, she asked her servants to buy all the herbs in the world, and she studied and collected all the books on herbs. She consoled herself, thinking that she would quickly find a cure, but everything was difficult, and there was no success. However, she still believed that she would recover and meet Kabil with a smile. One fine morning, she was tending the flowers in the castle, thinking for a long time about how to change her plot. The maid came to comfort her, asking if everything was okay. They had been worried about her ever since Kabul left home. Although she pretended to be fine, the disease was progressing. It had been 2 years since it started, and there was still no cure. However, she was not going to die. While walking in the park with her maid Anna, her attention was drawn to strange little flowers that she had never seen before. Anna said that they appeared here recently, and that Elodie had mentioned them once, that she wanted to investigate, but there were no seeds. She also took care of the flowers, and regularly pruned them, and saved them for her duchess's future experiments. Elodie thanked her, and asked to bring all the samples she had collected. They should be examined immediately. Because this was a plant that was not in any book, maybe it would cure her. She began her research by brewing green tea from the stem, although this flower was completely unknown to her. But it was worth the risk, although she was threatened with death. They drank a cup of tea and nothing happened. Basically as she expected, another futile attempt that didn't work, but it was worth a try. Stop. Wait. Something is happening. The fingers started moving. The paralysis was still there. but the condition of the hand had improved significantly. Finally, she found a cure, and who would have thought that it would be so close and work so quickly? And if that's the case, then if she drinks red flower tea, the effect will be even better. Elodie had already planned to continue drinking red flower tea every day. As long as it worked, she had nothing to worry about. And here was another sip. Suddenly, the tea falls from her hands, and Elodie begins to suffocate, falling to the floor. She fought for her life for a long time, not breathing and only coughing heavily. But at one point, she looked down at her hand and saw blood. But why is there blood on her hand? But she had tested for poison in the flour, and the test was clean. So was it really a toxin she hadn't been able to detect? She touched her hand to her lips to wipe them, and suddenly understood. She can move her fingers again. The stem relieved the symptoms of paralysis, and after drinking red tea, she felt her fingers again. The only thing that scared her was the blood, which is not a good result of the tea. Since it wasn't painful, it might just be worth continuing to observe the effect and how long it would last. The only thing she was worried about was coughing up blood, and what everyone would worry about if they saw it. She had to come up with something to mitigate the effects of the poison, but she had to keep it a secret. The day had been long and she was tired, but the important thing was that she had found a way to heal herself. She hid the handkerchief with the blood in her desk, deciding that no one would find it there. In the morning, she looked happy, wearing her new luxurious dress and reading a book. The day promised to be a good one. The maids stood behind the Duchess and were glad to see her like this. She looked happy again and eager to work. They decided that those flowers had helped, so they decided to bring more. The Duchess ordered Anna to start cleaning her office when she left. Anna took a broom and started sweeping, but noticed something. Her mistress's white handkerchief was lying on the table. She thought that she had probably forgotten it again and that she should bring it. Anna picked up the handkerchief and looked at it with horror. There was blood there. She couldn't believe her eyes. Was Elodie really not okay? That same evening, Kabil was drawing up a plan for an attack on the enemy, something he should have thought through carefully, even though there was no time for it. They planned to attack the Kingdom of Earth tomorrow evening. They were already close to their goal, and he didn't want to wait any longer for a good opportunity. His knights asked him to think about his decision. It was too hasty. Usually Kabal was very calm, but now something was disturbing him. And all because next to him stood a young, beautiful woman who had information. The knights did not believe her and assured the Duke that she might be a traitor. Kabil looked at her again, thoughtful. He began to remember the past, because this war had already dragged on for too long, longer than they had expected, and all because the Kingdom of Earth was aimed at creating a great empire and was destroying all the kingdoms around it, increasing its army. Because of this, the emperor had to gather more troops and unite with the temple and take forward positions to hold the defenses, and due to these delays, they reached a stalemate. Because of all these idiots and their power struggles, he was still forced to fight when he wanted so badly to get back to his wife. His magic stone assured him that it wouldn't be long before he would help Kabil end this war and return him to his beloved. But the Duke could no longer wait and listen to all their promises. He complained that he no longer believed in these promises, and even a few days was already too much. To hasten victory, Kabil trained harder to feed Ifrit his mana, and his strength grew. Ifrit was angry. Why, the boy had waited for years, and now he was angry and couldn't wait a few days. But if forcing Ifrit to feed on mana wouldn't make it grow faster, then what was Kabil's problem? And he was nervous, because he had heard gossip that a knight's wife had found another man and had betrayed him. They laughed at those who were married, because they thought their wives couldn't wait that long. He didn't want to believe that Elodie would betray him, but he was worried that no one knew or heard anything about the Cernois house, whether everything was okay there. Although Elodie had promised to write to him, he had not received any letters. Had Elodie forgotten about him because there had been no letter in all that time? And what if she's already happy but with another man? Could she really do that to him? He was holding his heart because maybe she had died, and Ifrit was looking at it and just saying that the guy was a fool who had already made up a whole novel. Kabul ordered Ifrit to disappear, otherwise he would only make noise. And in general, when he was little, he was much more beautiful and cute. The boy continued to hold his heart and think about his beloved wife, and a rustling began. The knights shouted, "Catch the princess! Catch her! She is running away!" Kabil listened to the sounds, and out of nowhere, a princess fell from the sky. Does that happen? Princesses don't just fall from the sky. He caught her and brought her to the chamber to discuss what to do with her. They considered her a traitor who had been sent to spy on their camp. She claimed to be the true princess of the kingdom of Daev, which had been captured, and that King Urta should come to their castle tomorrow to take her as his wife. The knights glanced at each other, not knowing whether to trust her, but if it was true, they could win the king over when he least expected it. Bedos asked if this was true as she escaped and opened the castle gates. She replied that it was because of a bracelet that belonged to her mother. The people of Urta are unaware of her magical abilities and will continue to search for her within the castle. Unfortunately, her mother died in her escape. The girl cried from the memories of what had happened. The knights seemed to start to trust her and almost agreed to help her. That was why all this fuss about changing the plan had begun. If the king really did arrive, he should be captured. So the duke ordered Bedos to stay and watch over the princess. The knights began to rebel for a change in plan, to which Kabyle objected and said that he was disappointed in them if they had so easily believed this woman. He ordered her to be killed if there was no news by tomorrow. This war had hardened Kabyle and made him cruel. The plan has not been changed, so they will proceed according to previous agreements. Morning, the hall of King Daev was in blood. Kabyle made his way there, sitting in the chair of the fallen king, waiting for the enemies. According to Princess Urta, she was supposed to arrive in the morning, but he was surprised by the woman's words. No one came to greet us? Had Daev's lousy dogs gone mad? In the midst of his thoughts, a man, blonde, entered the hall. Kabyle rose from his throne and asked if this man was the king of Urta. If so, then he was late. King Urta was angry, shouting, "Who is this little rascal who dares to talk to him like that?" However, Kabyle did not tolerate such talk in his direction. One swing of the sword, a sea of blood, and only a glow in the duke's eyes from the long-awaited revenge. He only wiped the blood from his face, looking coldly at his defeated enemy. He spoke quietly. Everyone was sleeping here, but Ifrit instantly rose into the air, burning everything in the castle to ashes. The royal court of Daev and all the enemies burned in a fire that magically did not go out. At that time, Kabyle set out to lead the knights and set out for Urta. The king was no longer there, and part of the army was burning, so there was very little left. Wherever the army of Kabyle went, fire burned. The bright flame burned everything and everyone in its path, and even soldiers who surrendered, it did not spare. Hearing this news, the imperial army joined the knights of Kabyle. They looked with blessing at the boy who destroyed all enemies together with the Red Wolf. Thanks to Kabyle and his knights, the war ended, and they were able to return to their families. The news about this was published in all the newspapers, and all the residents, servants, and townspeople were talking about it. Even Elodie opened her mouth when she heard this news. She clearly remembered that the war was supposed to last 10 years. Not knowing what had changed, she was still happy that Kabyle would soon return. But there was one but, the princess he had to bring with him as a reward for his victory. This was the only thing that bothered Elodie. It seemed that it was time for her to leave the stage. In the evening, Kabyle and the army general were talking. The general wanted to see the boy in the capital when they returned home. The commander wanted the duke to come to the imperial court and introduce the princess he had saved so that he would be glorified even more. But the boy didn't like the idea. He wasn't too concerned about the princess, and even less about glory from the emperor. He didn't really like fame, although he had unrealistic skills. Thanks to magic, he quickly tracked down the people he needed, whom he had already gotten rid of, but he didn't want to celebrate, not with them. However, rumors spread to the emperor that Kabyle was the child of the god they worshipped due to his unreal strength and possession of the Red Wolf. They even began to call him the god of Tevekra. After more people found out, the real madness began. Even Princess Daev gave her magic bracelet to the temple as a relic to the god. In the temple, they began to praise her for her deed and even linked her to Kabyle, as if the child of God and the holy chosen princess had led the war to victory by spreading various terrible rumors. To him, these were obvious nonsense created for gossip among the people, but he was happy with the thought that he would soon be home and would not have to cross paths with these people. And what was more important, would his wife like him? Because many years had passed, and he had changed a lot, but not without scars. I wonder how she had changed. His vulgar thoughts were interrupted by a magic stone. Noting that as long as he wore the red wolf in the stone, it could hear all his thoughts, it was better to be more modest. He came out of the ruby to say how hard it was for him to sleep when Kabyle was thinking so much. He wished he would be quieter. And it turns out he can change his form, from a big wolf to a small wolf. No matter how cute you think he is, don't you dare. He's scary. Kabil continued to look in the mirror, so Ifrit noticed that the boy was still worried about his old words, that he was scary and no one would love him. They both quarreled as usual, covering each other's mouths. They parted ways because they both went to sleep. Elodie started her morning very cheerfully. Everything seemed so wonderful and bright. She put on a luxurious dress, letting her long pink hair down. She and Cercerion were already standing at the steps of the manor, waiting. She asked if he missed his brother, who had gone off to war with the Duke. If he didn't want to go to war someday, he was ordered to guard the Duchess, to whom he had already become accustomed. She flattered him with compliments about how well he managed the knights. They all praised him, and in general, he kept her company wonderfully. It was time for Elodie to return to the manor to her business, and Cercerion escorted her inside, continuing their working conversations. The girl lay in bed, lost in her thoughts. She felt oppressed by the fact that the story had changed since the hostage princess became part of the novel, and Kabyle was generally called the Children of God. And who was this fiery spirit? She had never heard anything like it before. Had she become so fixated on the war that she had forgotten everything else? After all, it had been 7 years. She wondered if that little boy, Kabyle, still remembered her. Children often forget their childhood memories, so maybe that was why he hadn't answered all her letters. If that's the case, and he's forgotten about her, then the divorce should be easy. She planned to just disappear from the estate like nothing happened. These thoughts made her feel even worse. She didn't expect her end to come so quickly. She hoped he would at least let her live peacefully somewhere on the edge. Several more days passed in such a turbulent atmosphere. It was a weekday morning. Everyone was hurrying somewhere, busy preparing for an important day. The maids polish everything to a shine. The butler keeps an eye on order and makes sure nothing is forgotten. While Elodie is dressed in the finest silk dresses, luxurious perfumes, and lingerie, her hair is like what they write in the most expensive magazines. She thought it was too much, but the maids assured her that it wasn't, because she would finally see the Duke and she had to look gorgeous. She was uncomfortable. She had never worn something like that before, but everyone insisted. While everyone was thinking about their childhood love, she was already preparing to talk about divorce. After years of deliberation, she was ready to divorce him, but even these thoughts distracted her from her thoughts by the maids, who saw a crowd of horses entering the yard. These were knights led by Duke Kabyle Kernoy, now a respected young man among the nobility, who had won the trust of the emperor himself. God, how handsome he was! Now they met not only with their eyes. They stood close to each other. He looked confidently with a smile. She looked fearfully with excitement. He took the first step, hugging her with a joyful cry. "My wife!" He had waited too long not to do this. He gently said how much he missed her and didn't want to let her go, not even for a day. She didn't even understand what had happened. Hadn't he grown up too quickly? This wasn't the reaction from her husband she had expected. And what about divorce and a princess? The knights who had arrived with him looked at them in whispers. They had never seen the commander like this. Could he really be capable of such love and loyalty to one woman? The knights realized that this was no ordinary duchess. She was truly his weakness, which is why she was so close to the commander. He was like that with no one else. Heinz, the Duke's loyal soldier, seeing this tenderness, did not believe in their love. He asked why she had not sent a single letter to the commander, but Bedos objected, so that he would not be rude to the Duchess. After all, the Duke refused to personally thank the Emperor because he was in a hurry to go home to his wife, so something like this was to be expected. Heinz still believed that Elodie was not worthy of a duke, and that he would be much better off with a princess, beautiful and elegant. The Emperor even wanted to bring them together, and the princess was not against it. No matter how you look at it, it was the best choice, but the Duke refused. Heinz just wanted true happiness for the commander, who saved the empire and their knights. He believes that the only one who will melt his heart is the princess, not the woman with the confused face, who had probably spent all the Duke's money and was hoping he wouldn't come back. He didn't trust her, even though he didn't know her, but he already hated her. The maids and the butler cried, because they were still children when they got married, and the war separated them, and now they are together again, and it's so sweet. The servants cried all day instead of celebrating, but it was all in vain. They were tears of happiness at seeing the young Duke again. But besides the good news, they also knew the bad news. Their beloved Elodie was suffering from a rare, incurable disease, how hard her life was, and how to help her. The butler asked everyone to calm down and not get upset, at least not in front of Elodie. It's already hard for her to live with this. There must be a reason why this is her secret, and it's better to be careful. And Kabyle hugged her so long and hard that Elodie was out of breath and asked to stop, who knew he missed her so much. They looked at each other for a long time again, because they had both grown up and changed a lot. She wanted to tell a lot of things, and as soon as she started saying that he had been through a lot, she was interrupted by a servant who also wanted to spend time with the young master. They were tearful and happy to see him, asked him not to leave them again, and welcomed him home hundreds of times. Elodie extended her hand to the Duke and invited him inside the house. He was probably tired, and it was time for him to rest in his chambers. He took her hand and looked at it even longer. Her hand, it was so small. He himself didn't understand how he had grown up. He wasn't the same little boy anymore. It seemed so sweet to him, her hand so delicate and small, that he put it to his face and kissed it warmly. He was saying such romantic and intimate things to her that she felt embarrassed and took her hand away to hurry him into the room. He was scared by this cold. Why was she so strange? It seemed as if his wife was not happy to see him. Something was wrong. Elodie walked with her head down and was ready to cry. Everything was not as she had expected. His touches, they were so pleasant. And his arms, they had so many scars. She wanted to hug him and tell him how brave he was. She put her hand to her heart, wondering why it was beating so fast. It was just a surprise. Nothing else could and should be happening. You need to remember your place, which will soon be taken by another woman. Soon everything will have to change. They entered the room, which was the same as when he left. She hadn't changed anything specifically to make him feel comfortable when he returned. As much as he enjoyed the view of the estate, Elodie took good care of the house. She did everything she could to protect his property, and she wanted to surprise him even more. She suggested that he rest, and she would prepare warm water for him so he could bathe before bed. Kabyle leaned close to her and asked, "Dear wife, are you planning to buy me?" Elodie froze in place. But the girl had once told him that adult married couples could take a bath together, naked, she remembered. Her eyes were darting around and couldn't help but look into his eyes, and he looked very confident when he said that. She didn't know how to explain what she had said to him as a child. She tried to say something, but he laughed when he saw her blush and said it was just a joke, and she was very cute. You should have seen her face when she heard that. She wanted to run away from this shame as quickly as possible. He looked at her footprints and didn't understand what he had done wrong, because he wanted to be cute, like he used to be, 7 years ago. Looking at the room, everything was the same furniture, the fireplace, and only his lady seemed different. What if she really wasn't happy to see him? It's a terrible feeling when you're not loved in return. Dinner, a beautifully set table. They are having dinner together. She is used to living alone. She already knows her daily routine, who she should say to and what. But now everything is different. Now she doesn't know how to behave or talk. The atmosphere has changed a lot, she said. He just looked at the table awkwardly, with his head down, then looked at her again and looked down. The atmosphere was really not the same. They sat at the same table, as if they were strangers. The only thing left for her to do was eat as quickly as possible and escape from his gaze. He looked at her again and remembered the gossip between the nights, and maybe she really had found another man while he was gone. She was already beautiful before he left for the war, but now she had become incredible. It was hard to take your eyes off her. Was she really his wife, his dream? And she is so kind to everyone, and the servants and knights adore her. The peasants are also delighted with the Duchess. Apparently many are in love with her, but she is married to him, not to anyone else. Maybe everything can still be saved. They were walking around the house, and she started talking about how she had heard about all his exploits on the battlefield, and finally, awkwardly, said that she was proud of him. She stopped by his room, saying that it was time for him to rest in his bedroom, and she would be in the next one if needed. He asked worriedly why she wanted to share their bedrooms, since they had always slept together as children. She didn't know what to say, but something she wanted to say was already echoing in her mind. He already has a princess, so they'll be breaking up soon. And indeed, if you remember, in the original, he came with the princess. So where is she? So where is the princess? She would like to ask Kabyle, but she didn't dare. Kabyle started talking about them again. Married couples sleeping together. She herself had taught him this. He couldn't stand it, and said what he thought, that he already knew that she didn't love him and didn't want to be with him. and asked if she wasn't glad he was back. She only managed to ask what he had said, because she herself had not expected to hear those words. She denied it again, because she missed him, even though she did not look happy. He shouted after him that this was a misunderstanding. In fact, she was glad to see him, and he himself knew how long she had been waiting for him. He continued to walk away, going to his room, and again said how he felt. She didn't love him anymore. She touched his hand, saying awkwardly, "It's not like that, it's just hard." They started arguing. She couldn't describe her feelings, but he knew everything himself and was disappointed because he wanted more than anything in the world to see her happy. He looked at her affectionately, and she waved her hands nervously, proving that she was scared because they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and this was all new to her. When she sent him to war, he was still a child, and now he has returned as such a handsome man, and this is so unusual. All this is not because she doesn't love him. He is still dear to her. He looked at her again and asked if she really said that he was dear to her. Maybe that gave him some hope. She turned her head away, afraid to say it again, or maybe she should have said that he was dear as a friend or brother, but damn, they were married. And so she said that he was dear to her, so he was able to calm down a little, although he wanted her to continue to see him as the same boy. He was worried that when he arrived, she would be happy to hug him, tell him he was cute, and stroke his hair, telling him how good he was. This is exactly how he imagined the rapprochement of husband and wife. It seems he was wrong. He begged her not to run away from him, not to avoid him. He didn't know why she was doing this, but he wanted to be close to her like he used to be. She cried and asked him to give her time to get used to it, because he is still dear to her. You can't even imagine how much she loves him and how much she misses him. He lifted her head, looked her straight in the eyes, and asked her not to cry, wiping away her tears. She finally smiled and admitted that she missed him very much and dreamed every day of this meeting when he returned safe and sound. Finally, they reconciled and were left alone and able to talk about everything they had missed over the years. And she remembered something about how she had marked his height on the wall when he was little. She pointed to the wall where she still continued to draw her growth lines. Then he began to remember that she had once seemed so grown up and tall to him, and now she is so small, as if they have switched places. And now he is big and has to protect her, so small and fragile. They joked about it for a long time, and she even suggested that he stand against the wall again to measure his height now. When he stood against the wall, Elodie reached for his head as hard as she could, but she couldn't. He had really grown a lot. These warm memories were able to lift his spirits again, and he asked her if she had really missed him all this time. She looked at him sternly and said with confidence that she couldn't do anything else. She was bored. He looked at her slyly and said if she was bored, she should do something now. The two of them were lying in one bed in his bedroom. It was a dark night, and everyone in the house had long since fallen asleep. The only question is how it came to this, how she even agreed to get into bed with him. It's simple. He's a cunning one. He said he couldn't sleep and wanted her to put him to bed like she used to. She refused because she was going to sleep separately in the next room, but he was so sweet. He begged her to stay for just one night, no more. So they were lying together. He was sound asleep, and she was still thinking about everything she wanted to ask him as soon as he returned. How did he live in those difficult times? He was still such a small boy when he was taken to war, but he miraculously coped with everything. She didn't doubt him. She felt that he was the one. She covered him with a blanket and also began to fall asleep. The morning was more unexpected. Kabir woke up first and felt something next to him. Someone was fast asleep and snoring. Oh yes, Elodie was already in his arms. He closed his eyes again and hugged her tighter because that was what he wanted so much. But only for a moment, because if she woke up and found out that he had hugged her without permission, she would hate him. At least that's what he thought. He got out of bed while she was still asleep. He slapped himself in the face to come to his senses. He had to control himself. He couldn't change their relationship. He looked at her again and covered her with the blanket. How beautiful she was. Even when she was sleeping, she looked perfect. He got out of bed and went to wash his face, not wanting her to see him unhandsome or sleepy. Suddenly, a voice came from behind, asking where he had been, why he had woken up so early. Oh yes, it's Ifrit again, lying on the pillow next to Elodie. But he didn't come to the bedroom to see Kabir again. The Duke was furious. He did not want to wake his wife, and began to drive out Ifrit so that he would not disturb the lady's sleep. Ifrit narcissistically said that he wouldn't go. He wanted to see what the girl who saved his life looked like. Kabul told him to get out of there with hatred, scaring the hell out of the wolf, who just wanted to have fun. Ifrit hurried to the window, saying that he was going anyway, not because he was afraid of Kabil, but because he had planned to go for a walk anyway. Kabul waited until the wolf had definitely left the bedroom and sat down on the bed again, preparing to lie down next to his wife. He lay down next to her, looked at her for a long time, and felt that she was about to wake up, so he closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep. Elodie woke up to see her husband's face in front of her. He was still sleeping, and it was so awkward to see someone next to her in the bedroom. It's morning, and the house is already bustling. The maids are dressing Elodie. She looks luxurious, although she feels strange, because it's not comfortable to move. One maid hinted that she should look gorgeous, because the Duke of Kabul was back, although Elodie didn't understand what the difference was, or what the difference was. After sleeping together, she thought he would say that they should change clothes together, but luckily he agreed to leave the room. She blamed herself for wanting him to be with her, because they had been inseparable all their childhood. She wanted to prepare him for war so much that she didn't notice how he fell in love. The Duchess noticed that the maid Marie looked a little off, as if she had been crying. She asked her if everything was okay. Marie replied that it was. Nothing wrong. Elodie asked if she had had a fight with Bedos, and that was why she looked sad, since they had been dating for a long time. Marie couldn't say that it was because of the Duchess that she was crying, so she agreed and said that she had a fight with Bedos. But the Duchess wanted to know the details. She had to come up with something so as not to give herself away. The lady wondered how to help her, but Marie changed the subject, assuring her that everything was fine and that it was time for the Duchess to have breakfast. And the story that Marie couldn't tell happened in the garden of the estate. Bedos worried about the Duke because he wasn't so cold when he was younger. Back then he was still so young and naive. Marie wanted to say how much the Duchess loved her husband and missed him. Maybe she could melt his heart, but Bedos interrupted her. Remembering Princess Larissa of the Diev Kingdom, he believed that it was the princess who would be able to melt the heart of the master by giving him love. Marie's face changed, not understanding whether he was talking about it casually now that they had Elodie. Bedos believed that the princess was interested in Kabila, and that if the emperor invited him to the castle, it meant he wanted to bring them together. Marie couldn't stand it and argued with her lover. How could he talk about another woman when Kabil was already married to the lovely Elodie? Sir Bedos believed that Elodie and Kabul were just like brother and sister. They had been friends since childhood, and the lady probably also had another husband, so the emperor would help them get an easy divorce. After all, they got married when they were still children and didn't understand anything about marriage and its meaning, so he thought they would get divorced and live like brother and sister. Marie burst into tears because she didn't think he was such a cruel person, ready to tear apart a young family without even giving them a chance to try, without pitying the lady who had been waiting for the Duke so long. The girl burst into tears, and although he tried to calm her down and apologized for being wrong, she didn't want to listen to anything. He betrayed her feelings, but she's not that weak. The next moment, she gave him a big slap in the face. He clearly wasn't expecting this, but she felt relieved that she had repaid his cruelty. Marie clenched her fists, saying that she was meeting the wrong man and was waiting in vain for someone she didn't know at all. But as it turned out, he was just looking at her in confusion. Although he got on his knees and asked her forgiveness, that he was wrong and wrong, he wanted to correct himself, but Marie shut his mouth and told him to forget everything that happened between them. No one has the right to insult the Duchess. For Marie, her Duchess was more important than any man. Feminism is cool, and how could she even trust him? Unfortunately, she fell in love with the wrong one. She was proud of the Duchess, who had taken responsibility for the boy when he was still a child and raised him to be a real man. She constantly sent him letters, medicine, and weapons. Even Bedos received parcels. Despite her terrible illness, she worked hard and did everything to ensure that their house prospered and made money. But unfortunately, Okshin did not notice this. Therefore, she was determined to fight anyone who said bad things about the Duchess. No one had the right to do so. At the same time, Elodie spent time with Kabil in the city. He looked at each house for a long time, which had changed so much. There were no poor people and dilapidated houses. Everything was flourishing. Elida saw his surprise and asked what he thought about everything he saw, because the city had changed a lot during her reign. He raved about his wife, saying how amazing she was. He would never have built a city like she did. She noted that this was his land and city, so it was somehow not right to praise only her. He defended this land. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened. He looked at her and smiled, saying that she also defended this land. They are husband and wife, so they must share everything and glory too. She herself taught him so. And indeed, she once said that, but to outwit him and teach him how to eat vegetables that he didn't like so much, and now he remembers it and uses it against her. They walked through the streets past shops, where one of them really caught the Duchess's attention, with its gleaming glass. There were so many beautiful things there that she wanted to take them all. He also saw a very beautiful thing and thought it would suit his wife. He took an extremely beautiful pearl and pinned it to the girl's hair. Elodie seemed to shine even more, so beautiful that he couldn't look away. The shop assistant noted that the Duke had excellent taste in jewelry, as expected of a couple, and he would immediately choose something that suited his wife. They left the store very satisfied. The saleswoman gave the Duke the jewelry because it suited his wife. Elodie felt embarrassed because they grew up as brother and sister. Maybe he just saw her as his mother, but he didn't show his surprise when they were called a couple. Vuna thought he just didn't like romance. That's why he was so serious. Maybe that's why he left the princess, or there was some other reason. In any case, it's interesting when he'll file for divorce, because in the original, he talked about it right after his return. The story was very different now, so now she couldn't guess. Something had changed, and Kabyle was different too. According to the story in the newspaper, Kabyle met the princess just like before his reincarnation, so he'll probably bring her back soon and want to break up. There was also something she was very proud of and wanted to show him, her lab, which she had worked so hard on, and wanted Kabyle to know what she had accomplished. She was so happy thinking about the laboratory that she talked about her experiments non-stop and greatly comforted Kabyle with her attention. Walking around the house, they met Bedos. The girl greeted him kindly, asked about his health, and was generally glad to see him. But at some point, Sir Bedos's nose started bleeding. Elodie went over to wipe his face, trying to be polite and help him. While she was helping, Bedos looked up at Kabyle, who was looking at him with complete hatred. Bedos was worried that he had already done something wrong, that the Duke was killing him with his gaze. Then, when Elodie asked the knight to be careful, he was no longer a child. The girl left with the Duke, but Bedos would never forget this expression on his face. He had never seen his master like this before. Could this really be the man he had known for so long? He remembered Kabyle as emotionless, sometimes funny, but still cold, who wouldn't let anyone near him. So how could he really be that evil? Could he really be different to the Duchess? He seems genuinely happy with her. Even that hug yesterday was strange. Perhaps Maria was right, and he was wrong. Now he was truly ashamed in front of the Duke and Maria. Elodie brought the Duke to the laboratory, a place of incredible beauty. She had truly gone through a lot to make him so beautiful. It will be a pity to leave the laboratory when we have to part ways, because she spent a lot of time there with little Kabyle. She took him to every plant she planted, told him everything that burned inside her. It was truly her love, her science. Most importantly, she wanted to show the vast field of bushes from which she made medicine and sent them to war. But something didn't add up. The guy didn't remember any new medications being brought to him. Elodie was surprised because she had sent quite a few of them and thought he had tried them. Didn't any pills reach them? She sent them along with the letters. There were quite a few of them. They continued to stare at each other in confusion. What letters? The Duke asked, because he had not received a single letter or a single medicine in all that time. The only letter that Kabyle received was the one before he left for the war, and he still kept it, but nothing else. Elodie said in surprise, "That's why you didn't write me back, because you didn't receive my letters," and she thought he didn't write for safety reasons. Kabyle put his hands on his head and talked about loneliness. He felt that he had been abandoned, forgotten, and that was why he had not been written to specifically. He took her hand and kissed it gently, saying he was truly sorry. They both thought they had been abandoned, but it turns out the letters simply didn't reach their owners. She was getting agitated because she didn't want to cause him any trouble. She took her hand away, wondering why he had become so tactile. A strange feeling appeared in the middle of her chest, something that hadn't happened in the original story. Once again, the feeling that something had changed, and once again, he said that he was waiting for me. Kabyle was upset again. He said quietly, "Does it really disgust you, my lady, to touch me?" It was truly unbearable to think that she felt disgusted with him. As a child, she held his hand every day, hugged him, and loved him. So why is she so cold and running away from him now? She would like to say that couples in love can do this. For example, he and the princess, or that he was once a little boy, and now he is a grown man, and it's strange. To change the situation, she took his hand and moved closer. She had already asked him earlier to give her time to get used to the fact that he was a grown and handsome man, and she was uncomfortable for now. She reassured him that she still liked him, but their conversation was interrupted by the maid Marie, who called the Duchess to come with her. It turned out that a letter had come from the temple, and even though so much time had passed, they still remembered each other. What did they want? The letter said that they were sending a unique priest to the Duke of Cernois, and that the saints of the temple would personally come to greet him. They clearly had some kind of plan, or maybe it had something to do with the lost letters. Otherwise, why would they personally want to come? The temple in the Duchy of Cernois had been empty for many years, ever since Kabale became duke, so why were they interested in it now? It seems their main goal is to make Kabyle the chosen hero of God Tivaker, and just as she thought, Princess Larissa will also arrive. Elodie was annoyed that he was so eager to use Kabyle for his own purposes without thinking about him, but she was ready to accept her sentence. If Princess Larissa is the main character, and Kabyle is the main character, then they are destined to be together. Even if she doesn't know the whole story, she is sure that is the case. Since they were married as children, their marriage had to be approved in the temple when they turned 18, otherwise it was not valid and could be destroyed. She looked at her husband again. Unfortunately, if they were going to get a divorce, now was the time to do it. Kabyle didn't even know what was going on in his wife's mind. She was going crazy, and he was just living his life without thinking about any divorce. While Elodie was already waiting for the day when the princess would arrive, and the duke would want a divorce, because for this, she was probably reborn again. Looking at the princess's photo, it seemed like they would make a good couple, and even though it hurt her to think about it, it seemed like her heart felt something. Sir Bedos was minding his own business when he saw the duke walking towards him, so he waved for him to come over. The duke asked where his wife's handkerchief was, which she had given the knight while helping to wipe the blood from his face. Brian Bedos did not understand the question and had completely forgotten about the handkerchief and why the duke needed it. Kabyle got angry. He had to repeat it twice. It seems that after the war the knights completely forgot about discipline. It's time to teach them this again. Bedos was scared because his duke had changed a lot. Lately he had been very aggressive towards the men surrounding the Duchess. He gave the handkerchief to his master. The duke asked if the handkerchief was clean and had no trace of a man on it. Otherwise, Bedos assured him that he had washed it thoroughly. The duke told Brian to go away and not see him and his wife again for a while, except at the banquet. Today he made an exception for him. Although Sir Bedos was much older, and it was he who taught Kabyle everything he knew, trained him for years, but he had never seen the boy like this. He had truly changed. But there was something that worried the knight more: quarrels between warriors in the territory. There were knights who fought and those who stayed home, and because of this, there were many conflicts. Even the mercenaries who swore allegiance to the duke were embroiled in conflicts with other knights. How could he get them to work together? No matter how much Bedos hoped for a peaceful evening, something started to happen. Some knights attracted the attention of the emperor, asking him to show mercy. While everyone sat in surprise, Kabyle raised his head and looked at this shithead who dared to come when he wasn't invited. People who came without an invitation, vassals, one of whom was Baron Garcia, who thought Kabyle would die in the war. And why the hell did he come back alive? If the boy had died, the emperor would have given the territory to the Count of Bologna without hesitation. He bet all his fortune and sided with the count and lost. Because not only did Kabyle not die, he returned from the war a hero, which was no use to them. A few days before the holiday, the vassals gathered to discuss how to appease the duke and maintain their position by siding with the duke, at least pretending to be loyal to him. Baron Bernard, like the other vassals who came to the feast, was not at war, but he apologized to Kabyle for not going to support the duke earlier. They asked the guy to listen to them because they wanted peace, or so they said, although the guy refused, not wanting to waste his precious time on shitheads. They fell to their knees, apologizing and begging not to kill them, but the duke's gaze was indifferent, wondering how such a young boy could be so formidable. Kabyle rose from the throne and said, "Do they really think he would let the banquet prepared by his wife be ruined, and also for the sake of the selfish people who came to ask for forgiveness?" The vassals continued to apologize and promised to swear allegiance to the duke, who shook his head and ordered the knights to drive them away. Elodie saw his rage and took his hand. drawing his attention and allowing him to cool down a bit. She was saddened that because of those scoundrels, the knights who had worked so hard could not enjoy the holiday that was meant for them. Of course, she wanted the vassals to come and apologize, but now was not the time to quarrel with them and ruin the evening. Although she did not like them, she still wanted Kabila to be openly recognized as a duke and sworn allegiance, although now, thanks to the boy's fame, he did not need any recognition. But Kabila should still expand his influence, because the imperial family will want to use him for their own purposes, and he should receive reinforcements. He continued to look at her, and only at her, forgetting everyone around him. She looked confidently ahead while he held her hand. Then he changed and became softer, telling the shitheads that he wouldn't forgive them, but would at least hear their apology. They rejoiced, thinking that his wrath would no longer fall upon them, but he continued to follow them. The vassals thanked the duke by falling on their knees. And in just a few minutes, Elodie's tension dropped, and she realized that he was still holding her hand. Not shy in front of everyone, she barely kept herself from saying something unnecessary. She finally exhaled and admitted that he had won. Let him hold her hand longer. But what was the reason for his attachment to the lady? That was the only thing that interested her the most. Not counting the vassals, to whom there were many questions. Why is Baron Bernard on the side of the traitorous vassals? She thought after the war, they would all be different, clearly not on the side of Kabyle. Years ago, he had already been to their house, talking to Elodie, where he could not recognize her as the Duchess of the House of Kernoy, and demanded that she divorce her boyfriend. And here he was, sitting at the table, rejoicing for the Duke, congratulating him on his victory. She sensed an insidious plan of betrayal. And it's true, the vassals conspired because they didn't recognize Elodie. For them, she was just the crazy daughter of Count McClure, but in no way the wife of the hero of the empire. He often conspired with other counts to overthrow Elodie from the throne and put someone more favorable to them in her place. For example, the granddaughter of Count Bernard himself, beautiful and intelligent, and very beneficial to them. The Duchess should meet these standards, at a minimum. He even dared to appear at their court, telling Elodie that she was not the one Kabyle needed, but that his granddaughter would be a good support for the Duke. All she heard was blah blah blah. This wretch thought she was completely stupid and didn't understand his intentions, as if she would just leave the throne like that. Elodie wasn't going to keep quiet either, voicing everything she thought about him. She didn't need approval from some counts about her personal life, and if they even got divorced, it would be between them personally. And even if Kabyle wants to marry someone else, it's obvious that it won't be his granddaughter, because she's the smartest girl in his family. And anyway, if he hasn't heard, the emperor wants to marry Kabyle to the beautiful Princess Larissa, who is many times better than any countess. She made it clear to the count that he had no place here, and that he would never be able to sneak his poison into this house, and in general, it was time for him to leave them. Just look at his face. The fool didn't expect the young lady to contradict him, and even put him in his place. Elodie finished humiliating him, because she was bored with such pointless conversations, and bald men were generally not allowed in the house. She did everything she could to make him understand that he didn't belong here. After all, he wasn't interested in helping when Kabul was at war. He was considered a bastard. And now they all suddenly started pretending to be worried about the Duke and his situation, as if he needed a wife from one of his relatives. Oh, these insolent vassals. But this bald bastard hit back with the answer that Elodie didn't need the Duke either, because in all these years she hadn't written him a single letter. Although how did he know? Kabyle, who happened to be passing by, heard the disrespectful treatment of his wife. He entered the room full of anger. The Baron clearly realized his mistake when he saw the look on Kabyle's face that was ready to kill him. No one would dare to talk to his wife like that. The Duke reminded the Count that he was nobody, and now he might not even be able to face the audacity to communicate with the Duchess like that. Kabyle drew his sword to deal with the scoundrel. The Count only begged for mercy and did not understand why the Duke was protecting the woman. The bald fool fell to the ground and begged for mercy. And Kabyle loved to see fear in the eyes of scoundrels. When Kabyle pointed his sword at his neck, Elodie was frightened and went over to calm the Duke. She cried out of fear of what would happen next. He saw her tears, and his face changed. The sword fell from his hands, and he instantly took her hands to calm her down, because he only wanted to protect her. Elodie lowered her head, thinking what would have happened if Kabyle had heard the whole conversation. The Baron would probably be dead by now for his words. At that moment, the commander of the knights came running, asking what had happened because he had heard strange screams. He saw the situation and, without understanding it, concluded that this evil woman was manipulating the Duke so that he would fulfill her every wish. Although she tried to help the Baron get up and leave, the commander still decided that she had made it up specifically so that the Duke would bring the Barons down. Meanwhile, Kabyle continued to look at the bald scoundrel so that he would know not to cross the Duke's path. Otherwise, Heinz stood looking at everyone and didn't understand how the commander was influencing her. Could he really not just throw her out? Kabyle turned to Heinz and told him to go away too. He was busy now. Heinz obeyed and left, but continued to watch the woman. In his eyes, Kabyle had changed a lot because of that woman. He seemed to have become unhappy, and he couldn't just sit and watch all this. He was going to marry the princess and the Duke as soon as she arrived at their home. Maybe then, Kabyle would be back to how he was before. The guy was only concerned about how his wife felt. He must have really scared her with his actions. And yes, she asked to solve everything through talks, and not with the sword. If he wants to teach his vassals a lesson, then he should go to court. This is not a battlefield. Everything is different here. He wanted to be nice and agreed with her, apologizing for his behavior and admitting his mistake. Although Elodie's hands were shaking a lot, she said everything was fine, as if she wasn't even scared, but he knew that was a lie. He didn't understand why Elodie was so calm when the Baron insulted her so much. She didn't admit it was an insult, but Kabyle said that if someone insulted his wife, they would insult him too. She took his hands because it was important to her that someone supported her like that, especially when that someone was Kabyle. She taught him patience, that even when it was hard to treat them well, it was still worth earning their trust. The Duchess taught him good politics, that you shouldn't kill someone just because you want to. Sometimes you have to sort things out so your reputation doesn't fall. He agreed only for her smile, but in reality, his Nahir didn't need a good reputation, meetings with vassals, and the support of the temple. She exhaled calmly, thinking that finally, not knowing what was really going on in his head. Kajuil couldn't go against her. It's not hard, just don't kill people you don't like. He'll at least try. The next morning, Baron Bayer was already in the Duke's office. He wanted to say something more, but Kabyle stopped him. He agreed to pardon him only because his wife said so. He would give him another chance to improve and prove his loyalty. So another chance, even though the Baron didn't understand what was going on. He was given 2 months to repair his reputation. Kabyle again didn't let him say anything and continued. Considering the way the Baron talked to the Duchess, it seemed he didn't know how much work his wife had done while he was gone. He ordered the Baron to spend time with his family and say goodbye to them, because he would spend the rest of his time writing a report on all the Duchess's achievements. He also has to go to the Forest of Death, where they say there are many monsters, and hunt them. He did a good job, because he was eager to send the Baron to execution immediately, but if he suddenly disappeared, Elodie would guess the reason. The Baron shouted that he had just returned from the war and should spend the rest of his life with his family and not in a new war. Kabyle agreed. If that was the case, then let him take his family and move with them to the Forest of Death to spend the rest of his life together. The Baron refused, but Kabyle did not allow anyone to deny his order. No one had the right to deny it, except for Elodie, of course. Kabyle noticed that the Baron had talked a lot about loyalty to the Duke, but his loyalty had disappeared now that he had been given the order. It was all empty words. The bald fool cried when Kabyle said that they might meet in a few months, and maybe not. Then the Baron decided for sure that the witch Duchess had bewitched him. Otherwise, the Duke would not have done this to him. She said that she prepared strange potions and must have used one. It was then that the Baron decided that he had to investigate this matter and prove her guilt. If the Duke and Iris were together, then everything would be fine. And this very Iris, the Baron's granddaughter, was already walking around the office after a terrible meeting with the Duke. Her grandfather had promised her marriage to the Duke, but he hadn't even looked at her. Her grandfather also disappeared somewhere. A strange coincidence. When she thought about seducing the guy, he simply pretended not to see her and walked past. She frowned because no man had ever done this to her before, and she had a prince who promised to marry her, so why did she need a duke? It was no use wearing such a beautiful dress when no one noticed, but she found a bush of beautiful roses in the garden. An incredible pink color, just like the prince who once saved her as a child when she almost fell. He had beautiful pink hair, which she remembered so much and tried to find again. While the girl was looking at the flowers, someone came up from behind and asked if she liked the flowers. She got scared and shouted at Elodie, You can't just sneak up from behind to talk. Elodie apologized for scaring her, but the Countess forgot her insult as soon as she saw the beautiful pink hair, just like that prince's. The Duchess guessed that the Baron had sent his granddaughter to the castle, but she greeted her politely, asking the girl about everything. Elodie found it funny how the Countess spoke about herself in the third person. She immediately remembered Kabel, who said the same thing. Kabel ate, Kabel slept. The Duchess also praised the girl's dress, noting its incredible color and beauty. It fits, the girl noted. Iris looked at the woman again and realized that this noblewoman in the Cernois garden was the Duchess. Thinking that the woman had come to look at Iris to see if the Duke would fall in love with her. Iris felt disgusted by the Duchess, and how could this woman think that Iris would like such an ordinary compliment? The only thing she praised the Duchess for was that she at least had taste in dresses, not as great as Iris's, of course, but still. And the morning began with news. A letter with an order from the Duke to immediately go to the Forest of Death to exterminate the monsters. It seems the vassal's plan had failed. The vassal ran to the Baron to complain about Cernois. The Baron asked what had happened to him, why he had been beaten, and he cried and told about Elodie's evil maids who had beaten him because he had spoken bad words about their Duchess. They would find him and his family and kill him. Today, one of them was running after him with a broom to find out who was behind him. Whoever betrays the Duchess has no right to live, they shouted. The Baron decided that such loyalty was frightening. Perhaps Elodie had also poisoned them with a potion, but how could they keep an eye on her when there were guards there? If the Duke's household recruited new servants, they would have a chance to reach Elodie and exile their traitors. He decided to start right away and start with the report the Duke had ordered him to make. It was time to go and inspect all the estates. The Baron opened his mouth wider than ever. Had the harvest really increased so much, and the cities become so rich? If this method were to be spread throughout the kingdom, the figures would increase even more, and he really had the Duchess to thank for that. He went to poor villages, but wow, they're not poor anymore. They've started to develop rapidly, and to such an extent. Everyone thought the Duke would divorce her as soon as he got back from the war, but is that really why he hasn't done so yet? There were 2 months left until the princess's arrival, so he couldn't just hope that his granddaughter Iris would conquer him. He had to build a new, clear plan. It seemed like it was time to side with the Duchess, even though it would hurt his pride. It was still better than rotting in the Forest of Death. It was necessary to find oneself in the same position as other vassals, and of course, share with them what one saw. While the castle of Cernois was preparing for battle, the maids prepared dinner and then weapons to destroy anyone who wanted to betray their mistress. They gathered together in the kitchen, waiting for news to come in to see if the real traitor was known, because they wanted to attack instantly and destroy him when he least expected it. They even brought an axe. Marie's maid had ordered them to carry weapons in case they had to protect their Duchess. How dare they even offer to sell information about the Duchess for a bribe? The maids were devoted to their Duchess, and even if they were offered a whole land, they still wouldn't say a word about Elodie. One of the maids was even upset that she was so close to the traitor, but couldn't catch him. She was reassured that she would be caught next time. Marie promised her that they would catch him and torture him until he told them everything he knew. While Elodie was writing something and had no idea about her maid's intentions, Kabel entered. He came with a soft toy and asked if she remembered what she had once told him. He was cute and soft like a stuffed rabbit, so he brought him. He raised it to his face and, smiling, asked if it still looked like a stuffed rabbit. Elodie laughed, not understanding what was wrong with him. He was in such a good mood, but she admitted that he was still cute. Kabel left the rabbit on the table and offered her some tea that he would brew, and she agreed. So he thought everything would get better, but he was wrong. Thinking that he would just scare the Baron into apologizing, he made it even worse by scaring Elodie. It seems like everything will never be the same again, so what should we do, and how can we change it? And here it is, Ifrit. We haven't seen this kid in a while. He flew out of nowhere, asking what happened this time. Kabel frowned, because where did he come from? It was so quiet without him. Ifrit flew in because he was bored and wanted to look around his possessions, and of course, meet his savior. Kabel grabbed him by the hair, saying that he wouldn't dare come near her, but Ifrit just wanted to have a nice chat. Why was Kabel so nervous? The Duke thought he was the only one the lady would find cute, and if Ifrit appeared, then she would love him even more. And he was going to hide it for as long as he lived, but oh, it seems his plan went awry. Elodie left the office sooner than Kabel expected. She saw a strange little animal and thought it was a puppy. She took him in her arms, looking at the cute baby, and remembered that she had read about him in the newspaper before. So she spoke to him, asking if he was the same artifact everyone was talking about. Ifrit was glad to meet her and thanked her for his life. He asked the girl how she managed to save his life, but she couldn't tell the truth about her reincarnation, so she pretended it was an accident. Ifrit, of course, had doubts, but he pretended to believe it. He was grateful that she had saved him, and she was grateful that he had protected Kabil the whole time. Ifrit was glad that he would finally have someone to talk to. Otherwise, it would be impossible with the Duke. He doesn't even appreciate that he saved him. Kabil angrily grabbed Ifrit again and asked Elodie not to talk to the strange magical animals, and instead went for a walk with him. Ifrit was offended and wagged his tail as he walked away. Elodie was upset because he was so cute. Elodie asked if they could just leave Ifrit unattended. Kabil assured her that they could, that she should ignore him, and that she should go with him. They were walking down the corridor, discussing the artifact and how good it was that Elodie had found it. He was once again grateful to her, and then someone stood ahead. One of the maids stood excitedly in the hallway. She lowered her head to greet the lady. But Elodie thought something was wrong, and Kabil also thought it was worth paying attention to her. She really looked upset. The girl agreed to talk to the maid, but if Kabil noticed something was wrong, it meant she didn't like it. She had a strange feeling that something had happened. At first, Marie was very upset. She always talked non-stop, but now she was silent. Anna's face has also been sad lately. Although she tried to find out what was wrong, Anna didn't admit it. And now there's a new maid. It's like her girls have been changed. It's worth asking Norman what's going on. Kabil asked her to do it later, because she was already very busy and had so many documents to sign. She hasn't even been going to the lab lately because she doesn't have time to do science, and she needs to finish all the important experiments before the princess arrives. They held hands, and the girl looked at him with a smile. He said it was time to go. They spent the evening together. By morning, of course, there were already quarrels among the knights. Some did not like the fact that the knights had changed their minds. They did not like the lady, and she suddenly changed her mind. Do they all believe the gossip that the letters the lady wrote to the Duke were intercepted and sent to the temple? Where did this gossip come from anyway, and why did everyone believe it so easily? Of course, the temple servants could really do this. It wasn't the first time, but it still seemed strange to me. Yes, of course. The Duchess took excellent care of the Duke's house and property. They say that even taxes were reduced, and it was worth starting an investigation. This mercenary thought a lot about everything, especially about the traitors who didn't go to fight but stayed in the castle. What else they were doing here? Those who participated in the war at least fought to lead the emperor to victory. And what were the knights doing in the castle? Were they really killing monsters? It was no cause for pride, the fact that they protected the Duchess. But what irritated him the most were the knights from the Duchess's guild. No matter how much they argued, they never spoke ill of Elodie. For some reason, even those who fought praised the Duchess, sometimes even more than those who adore her in the castle. He had high hopes for the princess, that she would come and finally restore order to the Cernois house by changing their order. The mercenary could no longer listen to this talk about the ideal Duchess. She is this, she is that, blah blah blah. He attacked the knight standing nearby and told him how he had defeated the monster. He wanted to fight him to prove his point. He shouted how terrible the war was and what they had endured while those worthless knights sat in the castle and pretended to be very busy. He also attacked the other knights. He called them weaklings, who only knew what their duchess's name was. But soon a real princess would arrive and change everything here. Then their duchess would have to give up her place. As soon as he finished, someone instantly punched him in the face, deservedly so, because no one would tolerate such treatment of Elodie. The young blonde guy beat Heinz with all his might until he fell down without strength, but this only angered him even more. He attacked back, calling the knight names, and a real fierce fight began for the Duchess's honor and glory. When they had already begun to strangle each other, the commander entered the training hall with a shout. How dare these idiots start a fight if they should all be one army loyal to the general and not start quarrels among themselves? They stood up and stood before the general. He slapped them both in the face again, threatening to evict them if anyone mentioned the princess. He tried to be careful, because the Duke had changed. He was no longer the same as he was on the battlefield, and it was better to be careful with his words. He assured that the Duke of Cernois is not even thinking about divorce. He still hopes for his wife, just like in childhood, and if he finds out about what happened, It was necessary to smooth over this quarrel before the Duke found out. He warned both of them not to start fights, and that no one should mention the princess. Heinz insisted that he had told the truth, that when the princess appeared, the Duchess would not even appear on the doorstep. She had no place here. The commander hit the mercenary again, shouting as if he was still not afraid to say such words. He had gone completely crazy, but the mercenary still didn't understand. He asked Heinz to never speak about the Duchess again. She was not someone to be humiliated. He asked him to think about his words, and all because he remembered the Duke's look. He hoped that Heinz would understand, otherwise Kabyle would not pity him. The mercenary was annoyed that even the captain considered the Duchess important. At this time, Elodie and Kabyle went to the city to get the documents for the medicine that Elodie was producing. Again, there were many fakes. Something was wrong. The letters disappeared. The medicines she sent to the Duke. It was very profitable for someone, and it seems that she has become a competitor of the temple. There is no other way to explain these miracles. As soon as she started selling medicine, the temple was very suspiciously silent. Maybe she just didn't notice that they were trying to mess with her from the very beginning. Kabyle saw how restless she was and tried to ask what the problem was. The girl assured me that everything was fine. She was just thinking about her own things. After all, she was very busy and had a lot to think about. Walking through the city, they saw the street where Kabyle had once gotten lost. Of course he remembered, because she had saved him then. She was so scared then. By the way, she decided to tell Kabyle one of her secrets. The orphanage where he was still little. She went there and decided to tell him. What stress she caused them when she went there, demolished that horrible house, and put those shitheads who abused the children in prison. Kabyle listened attentively and silently took her hand. She stopped talking and looked at him. Did something happen? He held her hand tighter and blushed. He spoke softly, Duchess. He wanted to say something so much, but was afraid to speak. She smiled and stroked his face. She told him he could trust her, so she asked him to tell her what happened. The only thing he said was, Duchess, and then he fell silent again. She smiled and waited for some kind of answer. A day in the lab. Lately she hadn't had time to take her medicine because she wasn't alone. Someone was constantly accompanying her, and she had to drink tea because the illness still remained. She often looked around to see if anyone was nearby, and then she barely chased away Anna, who wanted to be nearby and clean up the lab. She needed to drink her portion of medicine as quickly as possible, while no one was around. She drank it and immediately looked at her hand. For some reason, there was no signal of a strong signal like before, whether it meant anything. She was lost in her thoughts, and, looking at her hand, did not notice that someone had entered the laboratory in search of the Duchess. It was very inconvenient, as she had just finished her tea. Elodie heard the maids coming to bring her dinner, so she ran away as quickly as possible, hiding near a tree. And here it was again. She started coughing up blood, but this time there was more blood. Is this really how it should be? She wiped her lips and raised her head when she suddenly saw Heinz in front of her, who had seen everything that had happened. She stood awkwardly in front of him. He continued to look at her with incomprehension. But here's the thing. They weren't personally acquainted yet. It seemed like everything was lost. She asked his name and greeted the mercenary politely. She noted that she had not had time to meet him at the reception because of the Baron. She apologized for getting his clothes dirty. She didn't think anyone would be here. She handed him a handkerchief to wipe his clothes. She looked around again, and how inconvenient it was. There was no one else there except Sir Heinz, fortunately. He asked the Duchess if these were perhaps the tears of a siren, and she asked again because it was the first time she had heard such a name. He told her about this serious illness that coastal residents often suffer from, and said that the symptoms of this illness were similar to a side effect of a medicinal herb. Not understanding why, she confided in him and told him her story from the very beginning of her illness. How could she trust a stranger like that? After everything, she begged him not to tell anyone about what had happened, especially not to the Duke. She wanted him to pretend he hadn't seen anything, and he asked her to tell someone about it so that she could get treatment. Otherwise, the end could be terrible, which she strongly denied because everyone would worry. He agreed, looking into her lovely eyes. This made her so happy that she couldn't hide her happiness. And he finally saw that she was much nicer than he thought. She seemed kind, as everyone says. He said goodbye to her and left, and she looked at his world with suspicion. Could he really be trusted? He came for a walk and got into such a story. Heinz thought about the story of the Duchess as he walked to the bedroom. She had contracted a fatal disease, and was still so stupid that she kept quiet. Did she really want to die? Once upon a time, his sister got sick like this and died of the same disease because it was already too late when he found out. Damn. Will he really take pity on her and decide to help the Duchess? Elodie ran as fast as she could to the Duke's bedroom, calling out to him just to hear his voice. She ran into the room and saw a guy holding a handkerchief over his head. It seemed he was sick. The Duchess was very worried about her husband, asking where it hurt, if he wanted anything, and what to bring him. She put her hand to his head to take his temperature and didn't seem to feel it. So what's hurting him? So let's start with the story. The Duke had spoken to Ifrit earlier that evening to get advice on how to get back together with his wife. Ifrit believed that simply being nice wasn't enough. Kabul still hadn't learned anything. He said the Duke had forgotten one very important thing, that the Duke's wife is also very fond of Ifrit because she likes everything that looks cute. Then Kabul got very angry. That's funny. Kabul was upset because he thought that he would really tell him some secret on how to win a woman, but he only mocked him. Although he gave one good idea, something that all women like, handsome men with strong muscles. He advised the Duke to straighten his shoulders and bare his body to show his masculinity. Kabul looked stupidly at Ifrit, who was captivated by the idea, who was claiming that let his wife lean on his manly body. It was always a victory, he believed. Then they came up with a new plan, and if it didn't work, then it was the end of Ifrit, and the plan was to pretend to be very sick. Kabul unbuttoned his shirt, pretending to be hot, and asked his wife to come to him. Elodie, who had already started crying, stood there awkwardly looking at his body. It was like this. So pumped up. Was it really because of years of training? He looked very strong and handsome every time he unbuttoned a button. But what worried her most was that his entire body was covered in scars, which he didn't show the magicians so they could heal him because these were injuries from childhood. She cried even more, holding his hand, and to calm her down, he stroked her hair with his hand and asked her not to cry because it would hurt his heart. He was upset that he had deceived her and brought her to tears, so he decided it was time to confess to her. When she asked where it hurt, he apologized and said that nothing hurt because he actually made it all up. She laughed happily and asked him not to do that again because she was so scared for him, and she asked if he had joked with the princess like that too. Kabil's face changed as he looked at her, not understanding what she was talking about, and the Duchess continued to laugh and joke about him and the princess, saying that he must be so cute when he was playing tricks on her. Kabil made an even more serious face and called her by name, to which she instantly reacted and stopped laughing. He asked her not to talk about the princess anymore because he did not like talking about that woman. In the morning, the Duchess remembered the night before last and the boy's reaction to her mention of the princess, and he reacted strangely, as if he wasn't in love with her at all. Is he just embarrassed? He probably thinks his wife shouldn't know about it and shouldn't tell him. The maid distracted Elodie from her fantasies by asking if there was any reason why the Duchess visited the knights so often. They both spied on the knights who were training, and then the maid realized that it was probably because of the new men. But in reality, Elodie was worried that Heinz might say something inappropriate among the knights. But it seems that everything is under control for now. But the maid didn't like these men. She spoke about it in a somewhat depressed way. All this is because most of the foreigners only talked about the princess, how wonderful and beautiful she was, which annoyed the locals. But Elodie was interested in what Mr. Beckerin mentioned, that his wife had toxicosis, and she really wanted peaches. She should ask the merchants to bring them. Everyone really wanted to try this sweet oriental fruit, so she tried to cheer up the girls somehow. And if the merchant Circa can get more of these fruits, maybe she will try growing them in a lab, and maybe that fruit from the legend is a peach. At least that's what the maid said. Elodie asked what legend she was talking about. Once upon a time, there lived a magician who transmitted magic through spirits. Magna Phonetesia was his name. They say he conquered the spirits of all the elements, and all thanks to one spirit fruit. Unfortunately, no one knew exactly what kind of fruit it was, but if it was a peach, it was still a rarity among them. Their conversation was interrupted by Sir Therion, on whom Elodie noticed bruises and scratches, and asked what happened again, but he remained silent. She was worried about them, wondering if they had run out of medicine. Maybe they should make some more, but he assured her that they had everything. The knight blushed, but he had to ask. He looked her straight in the eyes and asked if she was okay. Then she blushed too, but she smiled, not showing any concern. wondering why he was asking that, but replied that everything was fine. Then, he simply turned around and left, promising that he would definitely treat the wounds. He and the maid were still standing there, looking at his trail. It seemed like he wanted to say something, but ran away. Strange. When the ladies had left, he turned to look at them. His face was sad. He couldn't say what he wanted to say. At this time, Kabil sat frowning and lost in thought. It seemed that he should no longer trust Ifrit. Well, what feelings were there? It seemed as if they had become even more distant. But when she came running to treat him, it was as if they had returned to the past, when she was again caring for him and worrying. But his thoughts were once again interrupted by Elodie, who gave him a lot of work to do before the arrival of the princess in the temple. He sat over the documents and wondered why the emperor would send the princess to them when he already spent so little time with his wife. Now, because of work, they communicate even less and can't be alone, and even to be with her now, I had to make an effort. She was so busy with work and research that he couldn't take his eyes off her. He wasn't worried about the princess and was just waiting for the temple servants to arrive. He had his own plans for them. He was going to destroy them all for stealing her precious letters and the potions she had worked so hard to prepare for him. Elodie distracted him by asking what he was fantasizing about. He lied that he wasn't fantasizing. He was just looking at her. He almost showed his bloodlust in her presence again. You can't repeat such nonsense in front of her and scare your beloved. But it seems she knew something, because she asked if he wanted to take revenge on the people from the temple again. He thought it was their fault, but somehow she guessed, and he said it out loud. It turned out to be uncomfortable, and they both froze in the moment. She looked at him, and he tried to say something in his defense. She laughed and said that the temple was too strong to fight with, and it was better to just ask for compensation. He tried to argue, but Elodie didn't let him say a word, and asked him to keep things quiet in their house, as they had been before. He wanted war, but she looked into his eyes and asked for it for her, and his peace, his fire immediately went out. The princess was already on her way, so the time was coming when she should leave the estate. Sarah was already looking for a new home for her. Unfortunately, the day had come. The princess had already arrived at the estate. She was expensively dressed and so happy, and here it was, the Cernois estate. The ruler of the Heklos Empire, Albert, benefited the most from that war. The war hero, Kabil, did not claim power over the kingdom of Urta, and Princess Larissa temporarily surrendered control of her country to the empire. Although the kingdom of Urt retreated, there was a prince who fled the battlefield, and the princess, fearing another attack, agreed to a treaty. By giving the bracelet to the temple, Larissa strengthened the relationship between the empire and the emperor. Upon learning that Larissa was also the emperor's niece, he fell in love with her in a special way. And so he allowed her to stay in the capital, and she asked the emperor to help her repay the Duke of Cernois for saving her. The emperor, who was afraid of Kabil Cernois, came up with a cunning plan to marry Larissa and the duke to benefit the empire. So he intended to enlist the duke's support by sending the princess to him on a mission. The princess stood on the threshold of their house with a smile, expressing her joy at meeting them. Elodie also politely greeted the princess, while Kabil stood silently and waited for it to be over. The duchess noticed that the princess was indeed very beautiful and polite. She was glad that she was given such a warm welcome. The main character is not just like that. The princess turned to Kabil because she was glad to meet him again, but for some reason he wasn't very polite. This is the moment to see with your own eyes the main characters together, how cute and shy they are. Elodie watched, imagining what a good story they would come up with. She was sure they had something to say to each other. Then she remembered and asked the princess if she should not have arrived with the priests from the temple. Why were they not visible then? The princess said that they had stopped in Harma on the way and would arrive perhaps tomorrow or later. Elodie politely invited her into their home. She must have been tired after the journey and wanted to rest, for which she was very grateful. She assigned Olivia to assist the princess, who was very loyal to the duchess and could not refuse her. Looking at the maid, the princess became worried. The girl looked very upset. Maybe someone was insulting her, or maybe the gossip was true. There is a lot of gossip about the duchess in the capital, but when she met her in reality, she realized that she was completely different, so it was not about those gossips. Elodie continued working in her lab, but couldn't concentrate on her work, probably because it was time to go. Before the princess arrived, she still doubted whether she should go, but when she saw them together, she realized that she had to. The maid saw the lady sitting there very excitedly, so she went over to ask if everything was okay. But she lied, saying that everything was fine. It was just that one of her experiments had failed. The maid wanted to say something so much, the whole truth, to say that she knew everything, but she couldn't, and Elodie ran away from her into the garden. The girl was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. She felt great here, and probably because she had invested a lot of time and effort into these gardens. And even there, her thoughts were interrupted. Ifrit appeared out of nowhere, but was happy to see the girl. He asked why her savior's face was so sad. He said, she seemed to be worried about something too. Elodie asked why he said that, if Kabila was also worried about something. Ifrit couldn't say, but the girl understood that it was probably because of the princess. Ifrit asked what happened and promised that she could trust him. She was almost ready to tell the whole truth, but stopped. Behind her came the voice of the Duke, calling her because he had been looking for her for a long time and was glad to have found her. But he saw Ifrit and got angry again. Why was she spending her time with him? But it was a coincidence. He was just playing there when she came. Not that Kabila believed him, but he hoped that the shithead hadn't said anything inappropriate to his wife. Under the Duke's watchful eye, he had to leave, saying that he had nothing nice to say about Kabila, and this angered him even more. Then Elodie, smiling, asked if they had finally finished their childish showdowns. They were so funny when children quarreled. She asked him about the princess and realized that he was doing just fine without her, so she was redundant. But they returned to the castle together. He offered her his hand, wanting them to go to dinner as a couple, holding hands, but the girl took her hand away. But she said they were running late and it was time to leave, leaving the Duke behind, which upset him. Now she knew that she had no right to touch Kabila. He must already belong to someone else. But it seemed to him that for some reason, this wasn't right, and he wouldn't leave it like that. He clenched his hand into a fist and looked at her, and called out to get her attention. The maids and the princess were already waiting in the castle garden, walking around it. The girl was looking for the Duke, but the maid said he was with his wife. The evening before the princess's arrival, all the maids gathered to discuss who would go to help the princess. The Duchess would soon come to choose one. Of all of them, Olivia was the most interested. She shouted angrily that she would leave and that she could really be trusted. Olivia and Marie agreed that under no circumstances should the Duke and Princess be allowed to meet alone. The plan was brilliant. She was ready to risk her life to prevent them from meeting, all because the Duchess had saved her from execution for killing her own brother, who had beaten her and her mother. Lady Cernois is the only one who believed her and helped her mother when others wanted to execute her, so she owes her her life and will do anything for her happiness. The princess still wanted to ask about the Duchess and her experiments, but her maid screamed when she saw how beautiful the roses were in the garden. They couldn't believe that there were such beautiful ones. There were no similar ones even in the capital, and it wasn't so easy to find similar ones. While the maid was getting angry that the princess was picking the Duchess' flowers, the Baron's granddaughter came up to them and was not very pleasant. She got angry that someone was picking flowers from Iris's garden, screaming, not knowing it was the princess. Larissa just looked at the girl in surprise, wondering what she wanted from them. But when the assistant told Iris that the princess was standing in front of her, she seemed to glow with joy, unable to believe her eyes. She couldn't believe that a princess was standing in front of her. It was the first time she had seen such beauty, she said, introducing herself as the Baron's granddaughter. But even though she was delighted with the princess, she couldn't let anyone pick those beautiful roses, so she took the flowers straight from Larissa's hands. Larissa's maid was angry because no one has the right to encroach on what belongs to the princesses. They were ready to fight over the flowers. But Olivia said that this was the Duchess's garden, and that the flowers belonged to her, not to Iris or the princess. She agreed but corrected her by saying that the Duchess had given her all the pink roses in that garden, so it all belonged to her. Olivia didn't want to get into an argument anymore, but yes, the Duchess really said that only because she felt sorry for the girl who was screaming that she wanted the same. The princess was scared. They had never been in such conflicts before. Her assistant stood up for her, threatening everyone so that no one would insult the princess. But it seems Iris didn't care who she was, and that she was the emperor's niece. She was ready to fight for these flowers. The assistant was ready to attack the Baroness, but the princess stopped her, apologizing to Iris to finally leave. The princess politely took her assistant aside and said goodbye to the Baroness. She was indeed an intelligent and pleasant woman. But Iris didn't think so. She didn't see anything special in the woman, and generally thought that Iris was more suitable for the role of a princess and much prettier. Looking at those pink roses, she thought that the Duchess was her first love, because only she had the same hair color as that man. Maybe they were related. A good man who saved her would be more suitable for Iris than that evil duke, and a married one at that. While Iris was fantasizing, her assistant was thinking about the princess. It seems she also came here for a reason, but for the sake of the duke. While all the women in that house were dreaming about him, he was sitting at the table working on documents. Kabila was made to laugh by a letter he had just received from the emperor. He wrote that if Princess Larissa had shown initiative towards Kabila, he would allow him to marry her. The duke shared his desires to go to the capital and burn them all with Ifrit, which left him shocked, unable to imagine that the duke could be so evil. A foolish marriage. He asked Ifrit for advice on whether he should bring up the subject of marrying the princess himself. But Ifrit refused him this idea because the emperor and the temple could use it against him. It was better not to start. Until they themselves bring up the subject of remarriage, it would be better for him to remain silent. Unfortunately, he was right. The duke told Ifrit that he already had a wife he didn't want to divorce, so why were they acting like this and wanting to marry him? Kabil had already missed his wife, so every few minutes he looked out the window to see if she was sitting in the laboratory. He thought he would be a good ruler and spend every day with his wife, but it seems that this is not enough. Something has changed. It was getting more and more annoying to him. He didn't want to live like this anymore. Maybe it was enough to hide his anger, and it was time to talk to his wife. But Elodie didn't waste time on mischief. They brought her peaches, which she was very happy about. Now she could start studying them. She would like to learn more about this fruit from Circa, but it seems he was too busy dealing with counterfeit medicines. She believed he would be able to handle it. The woman took one peach for her research and went to the laboratory with Marie. Marie stopped the lady to look at something, and what was really going on there, and the fact that the Duchess's knights spent time with the princess, and it seemed they were happy, was all they talked about. Elodie noticed that Princess Larissa was trying to make friends with everyone, and seemed to have adapted already, which annoyed Marie because why would she if she had to leave soon? Although Elodie thought that the knights were at war with her because they had spent many days together on the battlefield against monsters in their territory, it seems that they loved the princess more. The princess wore a new luxurious dress for the ball that was to take place that evening, and the maid was helping her get dressed when suddenly an assistant came running. She began to shower the princess with compliments about her incredible appearance, as if she were an angel from heaven. The maid was angry because for her, the most beautiful lady was the Duchess, which is why the princess's assistant pushed her cruelly. The maid fell with a hard blow, but the princess got up and started helping her up. She scolded the maid that she shouldn't do that to a servant, especially someone else's. The maid didn't listen. She didn't care, and the only thing she cared about was the princess's hairdo for the ball. When the princess picked up the maid, she saw a wound on her arm. She was frightened and began to ask Olivia what had happened, because she could be trusted. Olivia couldn't trust a strange woman, so she just took her hands off the princess and said it was time for her to go cook dinner. The assistant said that the gossip in the capital about the Duchess and her beating of her servants seemed true. The princess burst into tears. She was so worried about that maid. The assistant Caroline didn't understand the princess and her worries, but yes, that's probably why the servants here were so sad. Caroline was fixing the princess's makeup while talking about the Duchess. They really believed that she was brewing potions from the tears of her maids. People said that the Duchess was evil and narcissistic, interested only in money and luxury. Some said that she brewed potions from the tears of the maids she tortured every day. The gossip seemed true, but it was hard to believe it when she saw the Duchess in person, and she seemed so nice. The princess thought she just didn't understand people. If Olivia is truly suffering from the Duchess, then she should be saved, and the Duchess's guilt should be proven. But all that would be later. Right now, she wanted to look incredible to interest the Duke with her beauty. First her hair, makeup, and then everything else. In the evening, Elodie made a toast to the princess, thanking her for coming to their castle and coming such a long way to visit them. Great music was playing, the table was set with delicious dishes, and it seems everyone liked everything. Elodie was drinking wine next to Kabyle. They were wearing very beautiful clothes, in the same style as the couple. The girl noticed that, thanks to the princess, their holiday was very fun. She joked a lot, and everyone was so happy. She seemed pleased that the knights adored the princess, but she was lying to herself. The feelings in her heart were not pleasant. Kabyle leaned closer to her. whispering something in her ear. He asked her to have fun because he would have a very important conversation with her later. He begged her to find time for him that evening. It seems that moment has come, as she had expected. Although he looked at her sternly, he took her hand very gently, making her promise to meet alone later. The princess was having fun and having a great time, but something caught her attention, which was the Duke whispering in his wife's ear. She was upset because she wanted his attention, but one of the knights distracted her to continue the conversation and asked if she really intended to marry the Duke. She lied when she said no, because the Duke was already married, and she couldn't tell him everything as it was. The knight said that the Duke wanted a divorce anyway. That's what the gossip was. And the princess wanted to ask everything about the Duke's relationship. When the conversation about the Duchess began, Caroline couldn't help but ask the knights if Elodie was strict with the servants and beat them. Of all the men, Heinz was the first to respond that it was all just gossip and she wasn't insulting the servants. Then Caroline began to ask the other knights if it was true that while the Duke was at war, his wife never wrote him a letter. But the knights shared a secret. The Duchess actually wrote, but her letters were intercepted by people from the temple for their own purposes. The princess listened very carefully. Maybe it was true, but she had no proof, she thought. Anyway, most people thought that the Duchess had forgotten about her husband when he was not there. They would have discussed her for a long time, but they were stopped by Heinz, who had recently hated her and now began to defend the Duchess. The knights were shocked by his words. Since he had changed his mind, why was he suddenly so kind? And really, why would he suddenly improve? He was already asking himself this question. He had been waiting so long for the princess. He thought for a long time about telling the whole truth to Kabyle, but every time he remembered the Duchess's sweet eyes that had so begged him to keep the secret. Suddenly, one of the knights entered the hall to deliver the news. He approached the Duke and said that the people from the temple had already arrived. Kabyle gave him a fierce look, for this was what he had been waiting for so long. It was time to go out and be polite, as his wife wanted. They went outside and it was already cool, so he gave his wife a cape, making sure she didn't freeze. She thanked him and looked at him so sweetly, and he followed her gaze so lovingly, but she just didn't notice. Two men emerged from the carriage, grateful that the Duke had met them in person. One of them was a priest, and the other a Knight Templar. Elodie graciously invited them to enter the castle and occupy their bedrooms and join them in their banquet in honor of the princess. But she paid attention to the carriage that had arrived. It was not alone and full of things, so the girl asked if these were all their things. The priest replied that in fact, these were all the supplies and medicines that Elodie had been sending to the war for the past 7 years. No one expected such an answer. Elodie stood in shock, while Kabyle was angry and wanted an explanation from the temple. The priest, in his defense, said that they had to intercept all the carriages for security reasons, which is why they took all the letters and medicines. Kabyle had never been so angry at the words that he should enter the temple position because it was for useful purposes. As an apology, the temple brought a gift for Elodie, one of the artifacts of the connection, a very expensive thing actually. The Duchess opened the box and saw something that looked like a mirror, although it was late of course, but at least they came and admitted everything. She was delighted with such a rare artifact, thanked him because she loved everything magical, and had long wanted to create something similar herself. The knight also gave her a box with a gift. It seems they felt a lot of guilt for bringing all this. When she opened the box, she was very surprised, because these were all her letters that she had written for the past 7 years. She thanked them very much, and asked them to go to the castle. Marie, the maid, escorted them into the castle, while Elodie stood behind and watched them go. Kabyle could not so easily forgive the temple for their actions, and looked at the carriages full of supplies that his wife had so laboriously procured. Elodie happily called him over, offering to take the box of letters. Although it was late, she still wanted him to read them all. It was very important for the guy, because he had been waiting for years for at least one of these letters. It was a very intimate moment. He took the box in the girl's hands, leaning even closer to her. How much he wanted to kiss her. It was worth a try, wasn't it? When he almost kissed her, she quickly stepped aside, pushing away from him, and handed over the box. The only thing left for him to do was open the box and look at the letters. There were so many of them. That's how many he had missed. With all his aggression, he asked his wife if it would make him feel better if he killed all those shitheads from the temple right now. She looked at his hand and said no. Even if he killed them all, he wouldn't feel better, and he needed to find their weak spot and hit it there to destroy it immediately. She didn't really want him to look for enemies when she left him. After so many years at war, he deserved to live peacefully and happily. Touched by her words, he asked her to hug him so that she wouldn't run away from him, but simply hugged him like they used to when they were little. She smiled gently and came closer, hugging me tightly like they used to when we were little. For him, it was the most precious thing in life, her hugs, her attention. For 7 years, she wrote to him, and he didn't even know it, but he was waiting for it so much. They stood there hugging for a long time until Marie arrived, wanting to warn them that the guests from the temple wanted to rest from their journey and therefore were not in a hurry for the holiday. Elodie happily said that it was time to end the celebration. That was enough for today, because the day had already been eventful and difficult. She quickly walked towards the castle, so that even Adil didn't have time to stop her. He wanted to help, but she refused and ran away as usual. He was upset that she had run away again, and he just wanted to be together longer. Elodie ran away because she felt anxious, why everything was so strange, and that it was harder to say goodbye to him. The knights left the banquet hall and saw many boxes in the middle of the castle hall. Didn't they understand that this was also part of the celebration? When one of the knights said that these must be gifts from the Duke, the maid Marie came up from behind and shouted that these were all supplies that the Duchess sent to her husband, but they were stolen by people from the temple. They had been stealing them for all these 7 years. She shamed anyone who thought badly of the Duchess. Marie told how all these years the woman had worried about Kabyle, sending him medicines she had made herself, all to protect him. She shouted at everyone standing in the hall, shouting that they all had to apologize to the Duchess, their whole lives. She angrily shouted everything she thought about them, until she heard crying behind her, and turned around and saw Heinz. He stood there in shock and sobbed, "Is this really true?" He fell to his knees and sobbed. "What a fool," Marie thought. Another day, the Duke sat in his office and read hundreds of letters, tears falling on them. He thought what a fool he was to think that she did not love him. In them, he finally felt that he had been comforted. He felt all the ladies' love and care for him, and before he thought she had forgotten. Damn it, he had only just received these letters, but they should have been killed for this act. Revenge is always sweet, he thought. "Did you see yourself?" Efred asked him, saying that the Duke's eyes were terribly swollen and red with fear. The Duke took the mirror, and indeed, he did not look very well. He sat up all night reading the letters and crying over them. He couldn't show himself to his wife like that, or she'd think he was scary. It's better to avoid her for a day. Besides, his heart was beating too fast from what he had read. At this time, a handsome blonde man stood at the window, looking out the window at 2 beautiful women, one of whom was a duchess. He was very happy to meet her. After all, he had his own plans for her, but you will learn about that later. The princess and Caroline spent the morning discussing things. Then, the people from the temple arrived at the wrong time, interrupting their plans for the Duke. There really is no help from them. They interfered with Larissa and Kabyle's personal meeting, but nothing can be changed. But the news that the temple was stealing supplies sent by the Duchess was true, meaning the gossip was not in vain. Now new gossip arose in the castle about the Duchess and her great work. The princess hoped this wouldn't affect her relationship with the Duke. He was so close to her, but at the same time so far away, and she wanted to be friends. Carolina gave Larissa the idea of why not greet the Duchess and go to her laboratory. The princess liked the idea, but how could she get there? Isn't it closed? Caroline insisted that she had to get there at all costs to check Elodie's machinations and get the Duke a divorce for the princess's sake. The assistant taught the princess strength. She is too soft, and to win the Duke, you need strength and confidence. Otherwise, she is not the only one who desires him. The woman whispered secrets about how the princess should seduce the Duke with her beauty. What wouldn't you do for the sake of a common goal? The princess blushed, but could not refuse, because most of all, she wanted to marry a war hero. But Elodie was busy with science. She immediately started working in the laboratory, showing Anna a new artifact, which she was, of course, going to take apart to better study its magical power. She had been holding back so long from opening it yesterday. It seemed to Anna that the Duchess would just break the artifact now. Could it really be taken apart so easily? Seeing how busy she was, Anna decided to give her time to be alone and not interfere with the Duchess's studies. Walking through the laboratory, she heard a knock and went to check. There was a princess standing on the doorstep. She wanted to find out what they needed. Caroline immediately attacked her with questions about why the lab was closed and no one could come in. She immediately wanted to know all the Duchess's secrets. She ordered the maid to open the door and let them in, but she refused, saying it was no place for strangers. There were rare plants growing there that the Duchess was studying. The princess kindly asked to let them in. She just wanted to know what Elodie was doing, unless of course she had nothing to hide. Anna was just about to ask Elodie if she could let her in, when she herself came up from behind, asking what was going on. She was also curious as to why the princess was so insistent on inspecting the laboratory, so she agreed to do it in person. When she entered, the princess was very surprised how it was possible to create such a beautiful greenhouse. Where did she get so many plants? They praised Elodie's efforts, but the princess also mentioned the laboratory. She wanted to go and take a look when they returned from the greenhouse. And then the princess stopped and cried out in alarm. Was this really the Epheria flower, her late mother's favorite plant? She thought she would never see it again. She loved this flower very much as a reminder of her mother. Elodie picked one flower and gave it to Larissa as a memento of her mother, because you can't find them anywhere else, for which the princess was very grateful. Larissa asked Elodie to let her come to the greenhouse more often. Elodie allowed her only if she notified her maid, and she would show her around. The princess was interested in why it was closed all the time. The Duchess laughed and said that it was because of the crazy dog that was constantly running around here. Then the princess became interested in the dog, which she had never seen in the castle before, thinking that Elodie had deceived her because she simply didn't want to let him in here. Larissa wanted the greenhouse to be open all the time, and anyone could come here, and she would like to spend the whole day there. The Duchess also took the girl to her laboratory, showing her where she spends every day, where the girl saw a sacred artifact, but for some reason it had been dismantled. She was only distracted by the scream of Carolina, who had already managed to pick up something. She was screaming that it was some kind of poison, and that now she would die. Elodie calmly said that it was just water, but the assistant was causing unnecessary panic. There was nothing poisonous in the laboratory. The assistant insisted that the Duchess was lying, whispering this in the princess's ear. Maybe it was the tears of the maids she was tormenting. The princess seemed to believe her. Isn't it strange that the greenhouse is closed? The holy artifact is broken, and there are some strange notes on the table. As soon as the princess reached for the papers on the Duchess's desk, the maid stopped her, warning her not to touch what belonged to Elodie. Immediately, Caroline attacked the maid, pushing her to the floor again and raising her hand to strike, while the princess simply watched. But Elodie grabbed her hand, looking sternly at her, to make her understand her place. No one has the right to insult her servants. The princess apologized to the Duchess for her assistant's actions, although the Duchess admitted that Olivia had no right to grab the princess's hand. Elodie insisted that they were not in the kingdom. They were now in the house of the Duke of Cernois, so let them follow the rules set by this house, so that there would be no more similar conflicts. Caroline decided to take a chance by asking the Duchess if it wasn't customary for you to give orders to new servants to teach them obedience for the future. Olivia shouted that she could endure anything for her lady, while Anna stood behind her and tried to calm her down. Elodie angrily apologized to Caroline, saying that in their house they did not abuse the servants, unlike in the castle. And if someone uses such castle rules here at the castle of Cernois, then they will have problems. The princess was just as scared as her assistant and promised to discipline her so that the Duchess wouldn't scold her anymore. Elodie didn't understand why they were so scared. She hadn't even gotten angry yet, and they were already afraid of her. Then she asked Anna to take Olivia back to the castle so she could rest. When she thought the princess would leave, she decided to stay to find out why Olivia had grabbed her hand when she wanted to look at what was written in those securities. She thought the Duchess had something to hide, but she calmly replied that these were just notes about her scientific research. She gave Larissa to read them. She took them in her hands to familiarize herself with them. She would have read every word, but they were written in an ancient language, and she understood nothing. The princess apologized to the Duchess, but Elodie didn't care anymore. And in general, how could it have come to this? Everything was different in the original. She didn't remember there being such a fanatical assistant who had already managed to get the Duchess, and if she continued to stay here with the princess, it would be a problem. She wasn't ashamed to beat another lady's servant, even in front of the princess, so what would happen if Elodie left them? In Elodie's plan, which she had been planning for years, everything was completely different, but the princess and Cable lived happily together with the servants. After all, the princess even dared to ask Elodie to teach her the ancient language. That's so unexpected. But how could she teach the princess an ancient language that was quite special and required a large amount of mana that the princess did not feel? It was mainly used by people who use magic to study artifacts and transfer magic. All other people with low mana affinity will find it more difficult or even impossible to learn this language. Elodie explained this to the princess, who also became interested in Kabyle. So he also knows the ancient language because he possesses the aura of the sword. That's why the princess wanted to learn the ancient language, thinking that this would bring her closer to the Duke as quickly as possible. That's when the maid decided that the princess should go to the Duke for language lessons. He was very smart and would be able to teach her. Elodie only frowned, but didn't admit to herself that she was jealous. In any case, they thanked her and left. She was glad that they had finally left the lab, because they were already taking up less time for her experiments, and she hoped she wouldn't see them here again. A strange feeling, an irritation. Did it mean anything, and why was she even feeling it? Elodie wondered. The princess stood in the garden and looked at the beautiful estate. Now she had already decided whether she wanted to stay in this estate, where there is a peaceful atmosphere and very kind knights, caring maids, and a greenhouse that will remind her of her mother. This place brought her thoughts back home. And here he is, the Duke, her savior. She already knew for sure that she was not going to leave this castle. Heinz was lying on the bed in his bedroom. He was holding a handkerchief that the Duchess had given him. Looking at her, he immediately cried, angry with himself for his weakness when thinking about Elodie. Just remembering her face and story, tears would immediately flow. The help from the Duchess was more than he expected. He could not even imagine that she was so worried about the Duke. He was very wrong to think that the Duchess had not worried about her husband for the past 7 years. In fact, she had worried more than anyone, like his younger sister, who until her death worried about him, hiding her illness. Not so long ago, he really wanted the Duke to leave Elodie and for the princess to take her place and for everything to work out for them. He regretted that he had been so wrong. Now he wanted the Duke to be happy with Lady Elodie. He truly dreamed of it. Then, he decided that the Duchess's illness must disappear. It is not yet known how, but they will succeed. The priest came to the Duchess confused because he wanted to check the artifact he had given her earlier. He wanted to make sure everything was okay with it. Elodie wondered why he did this, to which he replied that he had a feeling that something had happened to the artifact, and all because one count spread rumors that the Duchess had broken up with him. So the priest began to worry and came to check. If this was the case, then she was in danger. Elodie very simply agreed and brought the box with the artifact. And yes, it was intact and undamaged, not a single scratch. The priest examined him very well and thanked the Duchess for listening to him. So the gossip was false. He apologized again for disturbing her and wished her a good day and left. He made a fuss about Count de Foyer's lies. The Count who arrived at Elodie's house, along with the princess. If I recall, yesterday the princess was very carefully examining the disassembled artifact. She even became very interested in her records, which she could not examine only because they were in an ancient language, accusing her of treason. And after everything that happened yesterday, Amos came with a specific goal. It finally dawned on her that Princess Larissa suspected her of something sinister. Amos walked down the castle corridor, very angry. He was furious that these imperial fools had lied to him about the broken artifact. He figured that was how they had decided to drive the temple and the Duchess apart, when she was already angry with them for the missing supplies and letters. Now it would be even harder for him to win the Duke over to his side. It seems he understood the Emperor's plans to oust Elodie from the castle and put a princess in her place so that the hero would be on the Emperor's side. Amos thought it was simply ridiculous. Considering the number of supplies and letters the Duchess had sent, the Duke could not even think of divorce. Although they were grateful to the princess for the relic she had given them, they did not need it since the Duke possessed the power of spirits. They simply couldn't let those annoying imperial fools take the Duke to their side. Then, he decided it was time to make a plan to enlist the support of Kabyle, hold political negotiations with him, and conquer the imperial court. And for this, he realized that the best solution was to befriend the Duchess. He had long been interested in her magical abilities. And if the Duke's feelings for Elodie are genuine, then they will easily succeed in their plan if the Duchess is loyal to the temple. Amos met with the Knight Templar and offered to take him for a walk around the castle, but he refused because he had his own plans. He did not object and went away on his own, but the knight was interested in the room the Duchess was sitting in. He had come so far for her and still had not met her. She was alone in the room, her thoughts confused by recent events, so she decided it would be better to take a walk to the greenhouse. As soon as she took a step towards the exit and opened the door, standing in front of her was a man she hadn't seen since the day he arrived. Sir Theodore, taking the girl by the shoulders and asking if she was okay, looked her straight in the eyes, which made her feel embarrassed. She smiled and apologized for not noticing him. She was distracted by her own thoughts, so she apologized again. She wanted to leave, but she was ready to say goodbye, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there in silence. So Elodie walked past him, and he continued to watch her walk away from him, and again, he didn't dare, even though he had been waiting for it so long. Vig had been waiting to meet her for so long, knew a lot about her capabilities, her brilliant mind, and wanted to tell her something. He first heard her name during the war with the Kingdom of Earth, when, by order of the chief priest, he had to check all the documents going to the front. Among them were the letters to the Duchess, which he reread over and over again. At first he thought it was just work, and felt nothing more. Since they took the letters, the Duke did not receive them, and accordingly, there was no response, but he received them regularly. Despite the lack of response from the Duke, she continued to write, again and again and again, new letters, magic potions, and various things, and reading the letters over and over again. These words, Elodie who waits for you, Elodie who supports you, and finally, Elodie who loves you. These words struck him right in the heart. Every time he read the love-filled sentences, he felt guilty, and each time he waited more and more for the day when a new letter would arrive. Then he wondered what kind of person this Duchess was, how she could possibly give such love to a stranger. And finally, he himself wanted this kind of love, a love that would belong only to him. He demanded her boundless affection and the love she gave him in these letters. But when he heard gossip that the Duchess was a cold woman who had not sent a single letter to her husband, who had gone to war, he suppressed his feelings. He begged the chief priest to return the letters and supplies she had been sending him for years. He wanted to apologize to her. But he heard new gossip when he arrived in the capital that the emperor wanted to put the Duke and Princess in Elodie's place. He couldn't believe it, but on the other hand, if the Duke divorced his wife, if it really happened, then he would have a chance. Next time, for sure. Kabyle hadn't seen his wife for a whole day, and he kept reading her letters. It was a strange feeling. Every time he thought about her, his heart trembled, but he still avoided her. He was going crazy with these feelings, but he didn't know exactly what the Duchess herself was feeling. He grabbed the box of letters. It couldn't go on like this. He hadn't come home to stay so far away from his wife. He had just finished reading her letters, and he should have gone and thanked her for her concern. Maybe they'll even be able to talk to each other alone. If so, they'll be able to be closer. Just as he was about to leave, Ifrit called out of nowhere. He said to ask Elodie to open the greenhouse if he was going to her place. Kabyle asked him what the greenhouse was for, and all because he felt a lot of strong and fresh mana there, not like the one Kabyle had. Moreover, Ifrit reminded the boy that he had asked him not to follow him, and that he was better off in the greenhouse than next to the Duke. Of course, this angered Kabyle, but even more than that, he was annoyed by Ifrit, who was constantly around. And this shithead threatened Kabyle that he could sneak in there secretly, and then his wife would scold him. Not him, but Kabyle for not looking after him. The Duke could not afford to annoy his wife, so he agreed to the conditions of his unloved puppy. Kabyle was thinking about his wife again. He definitely had to meet her today, and was even fantasizing about this meeting. In the evening, the Duke went in search of his beloved wife because he could no longer wait to meet her. Suddenly, I heard new gossip about the Duchess, between the princess and the servants, that she was staying up late in the laboratory, which could ruin her health. The princess was happy to finally meet the Duke, but at the same time, she didn't expect it to happen so soon. She barely uttered his name to greet him. She asked where he was going, saying she was also looking for the Duchess to visit. Could they really be friends? He wondered. But the lab was in the wrong direction, and he wasn't going to waste his time on the princess when he was supposed to be meeting his wife. He warned the princess about this, saying that he didn't have time for her because he had an important conversation with his wife, so she'd better come another time. She was only saddened to hear how excited he was about his wife and how fondly he remembered her. Could this really mean that they wouldn't get divorced, but everyone promised her otherwise? And Caroline found out that the Duchess wasn't sleeping with her husband. If they live separately and don't fulfill their duties as a couple, then she has a chance. But he said something completely different. He quickly said goodbye to the princess without saying a single word, hurrying to Elodie. but the princess touched his hand, attracting his attention. She asked to give her some attention tomorrow. She would like to have tea with him. His gaze showed curiosity, interest in the princess, but not as much as she would have liked. The idea of marrying Larissa was just a whim of the emperor, nothing more. But he considered the slight interest he had in the war to be her curiosity. Only now it was somehow different. Her gaze and her feelings seemed similar to the way he looked at his wife, and he felt uncomfortable about it, so maybe his wife felt the same way, the discomfort from his gaze on her. Then he decided to allow himself to clarify something for her, reminding her that he wasn't going to divorce her. It was just to put everything in its place. He repeated to the princess again and again that he was never going to divorce his wife, even after his death. At this moment, Elodie was also standing behind, but she didn't say a word. Kabyle looked very confident, while the princess looked embarrassed and ready to cry. But she didn't see that either. It just seemed to her that they were having a good time together and looking good. She believed that everyone could say that Kabyle and Larissa were a wonderful couple, thinking that they would be happy. She understood this before, but why does it hurt her so unbearably now to think about it? She told herself every day that she had to leave, but apparently her indecision changed the story because she interfered with the characters, or so she thought. She believed that all these suspicions were due to the princess instinctively understanding that Elodie was capable of killing her like the villain in the original. She had already accepted her fate of being alone because she saw that Larissa was attracting more attention and love to herself, and she was destined to be a villain. Maybe that's why she felt her heart was heavy. Deep down, she also wanted to be loved. I was afraid that this feeling and envy of the princess would start to eat her up from the inside, and she would become as evil as in the original again. That's why she chose a different path after her rebirth, so as not to become like the previous Elodie. What if it happens as the princess suspects? The anxiety will disappear, and she will start to turn into her old self, evil and envious. What then? She was ready to sacrifice herself, but she didn't want to live in torment again and die from a terrible disease. There would be no chance to be reborn again. And she couldn't let her envy ruin Kabyle's happy future, for which she had fought for so long. At least she won't do it with her own hands, and she won't even let anyone do it. She decided that Kabyle couldn't see her in such a terrible state, because she loves him more than her life, him and no one else. Then she decided it was time to leave the house. At least she had already packed her things. All that was left was to take some medicine, and she could leave. And she wouldn't be able to tell Kabyle this in person, so she left a letter saying she was going on a trip for a few days, without saying where. Here she was, already out of the castle, her suitcase packed and ready to go. First, she had to go to Circa. He was supposed to find her a place to stay and take her there for a few days to sort out her feelings, and she was distracted by the conversations behind the wall. These people, it seems, are priests who should have left by now. What are they doing here so late at night? She heard part of their conversation, where they mentioned the Duke of Cernoy and what they had against Kabyle. She tried to overhear their conversation. They were talking about the emperor's plans, which he needed to prevent from carrying out his evil plan. Rumors spread that dukes from various lands began to demand that the emperor give them the lands of Earth, but he was not the kind of man to just give them up. That's why he decided to gain the power of Duke Cernoy. He wants to use the power of his fire spirit. They boasted that they would not allow this to happen to the emperor and the temple, the first to want to gain this power, and they also had a plan. They remembered the high priest waiting for the moment to kill the duke and possess his spirit, which is why he gave the lady that artifact. Elodie Lady held back from saying anything. She thought the artifact was a gift as an apology and not a cunning plan to kill Kabyle. But she knew that even the high priest was no match for the swordsman Kabyle, who wielded the fearsome magic of the duke. To defeat Kabyle, they need at least the power of the high priest and the lord of the magic tower. But they already had one artifact that was capable of partially subduing Kabyle, and it was already in the castle, so those men said. She still couldn't believe the words she had heard. Had they really come to kill him? Had they really the right to do so? Many have spoken of a magical artifact that can defeat anyone, but what kind of thing is this? Everyone is silent about this thing. The men began to talk about another secret, but she did not hear, because at that moment, other knights came to replace them. Sir Theodore and some other man. What are they doing so late at night? They're definitely not walking around the castle. She decided it was time for her to run away. Otherwise, they might see her. And indeed, when she started to walk away, Theodore felt something. He turned to look, wondering if he had a strange feeling, but there was no one to be seen at the entrance. Then he decided to go check it out himself, and lo and behold, the Duchess surprised him by meeting him at such a late hour. How did he know she was there, without even seeing her? Because the girl had hidden before he arrived. She had heard that knights who had reached a certain level were able to recognize a human presence without even seeing it, just by feeling it. She told him that she had been walking around the castle because she couldn't sleep. He agreed that the gardens here were really beautiful. But the only thing he saw more beautiful than them was her. He looked at every part of her body while she looked down awkwardly. Her cheeks were barely touched by a blush, and her lips were a delicate pink, like the roses from her garden. He was very sorry that he had not found out about her earlier. Maybe everything would have been different, as he had wished. His gaze fell to her hands, where he saw a suitcase, and of course asked what it was, but it was difficult for her to explain. She got excited and decided it was time to run away, said it was time for her, and only managed to take a few steps when she did. He shouted, "Wait, Duchess!" and also took a few steps towards her, grabbing her hand. He asked to give him another minute, apologized and asked to wait. He wanted to dare to say something. He saw her frightened look, said several times, I would like to say," and apologized once again for disturbing her. He let go of her hand, apologized again, and said he just wanted. She asked again what he wanted from her, panicking. He apologized and said, "Dear Duchess, stay with me for a few more minutes to talk, if you don't mind." She asked excitedly what they should talk about. She was afraid because they were all alone, and she knew about the evil intentions of the temple, and he was one of them. And when Kabul appeared in time, he found them both at night, still stroking her hand. Aggression and misunderstanding were mixed in his head. He was so angry that his eyes burned, as if he were about to burn the man alive. He asked loudly what this man wanted from his wife, all because he spent the whole evening looking for his beloved. He was in the laboratory and in the greenhouse. He knocked on the door of the office, but no one answered him. He was worried about where she could have gone, and where else to look for her. No one knew where the Duchess was. And then, from the bedroom where he had just knocked, thinking that maybe she was there, came Ifrit, who said that she wasn't there either. When asked what he was doing there, he said that he thought of coming to Kabil's bedroom, but the window was closed, so he flew into the Duchess's window. Kabul entered the bedroom, asking if he had seen her, but he said he hadn't seen her since morning, and all that was left was a note on the table. He took the note and read that she was going on a trip, but she hadn't told him anything like that. Isn't that strange, even for a few days? He clenched the note in his fist and ordered Ifrit to immediately find out where she was. He would follow her. That's how he ended up there with them, and was already beating the knight of the temple without understanding what had happened. Elodie begged him to stop, explaining that it was a misunderstanding, and he ended up with her by accident and was not to blame for anything. He just looked at her angrily and asked, "What exactly was the misunderstanding? You and your letter about the trip? Or maybe the suitcase in your hands and the man next to you?" She kept begging him to stop, asking him to come back to the room, and then they could talk. She would explain everything. Even though he let Theodore go and his eyes still burned with fire, he wouldn't forget it so easily. While Elodie apologized to Theodore, Kabil continued to watch him, not giving him a chance to do anything extra to his wife. She persuaded Kabil to go with him, while Theodore watched them go, wondering why he was so angry if he had only touched her hand. He thought he was behaving like a child, but it didn't matter, because he saw that their feelings weren't mutual, which meant he had a chance. She held his hand tightly, hurried into the room, dragged him along the entire corridor, and entered the bedroom. He looked at her from behind and decided that it wouldn't be like that. She had already decided enough. Now it was his turn. He stopped, pulling her hand towards him. He was the boss here now. She turned around when she saw his menacing gaze and shouted, "Kabil!" But he stood still and glared angrily. She was scared because she hadn't seen him like this in a long time. He slammed the door with all his strength, closing it. He took a few steps forward from the girl. She called his name again, and he just got angry and bit his lip. He raised his hands and put them to his head. But what the hell? What was this feeling he had now? Anger? Or maybe something else? She looked up excitedly, asking if everything was okay. But no, it wasn't okay. Everything was bad. Where was she going anyway? He asked. She lowered her gaze because she couldn't tell him everything. She only said quietly that she couldn't stay here anymore. She said she should have left before he arrived. Then he flew into a rage. That is, she was preparing to run away while he was fighting for her. And this note about the trip was just a reason to run away and never come back, and he would continue to wait for her anyway. He nervously asked again if she had someone else, when she took his hand and promised that she had no one. She continued to hold his hand and promised that everything was not as he thought. He was wrong and they had nothing in common with Theodore, and he was jealous for no reason. Then his gaze changed, became kinder, and he also took her hand gently, admitting that he believed her and apologizing for being so angry. He didn't know how to be angry with her and didn't doubt her. She couldn't betray him. She wasn't like that and wouldn't treat him like that. But seeing that man's gaze, he couldn't explain it in any other way than that he was in love with his wife. Now he has every reason to distrust that Knight Templar. He is plotting something against the Duke and has set his sights on his wife. She became upset again and admitted that she had thoughts of running away, and it seemed to her that she should leave the estate for a few days to think. Yes, she was scared of her feelings, but couldn't leave him after she found out. She wouldn't let her husband be destroyed for his power. He hugged her tightly because he felt he was losing her again, and this time she wasn't just running away from him for a few hours. Now she was running away forever. Then he looked at her again and said that this place was their home, so where was she going to run to? She just stared into his deep eyes in confusion. Then she said what she least wanted and what none of you expected, looking down. She said, not confidently, but still quietly, "Kabil, we need to prepare for a divorce." It seemed that something in his heart had broken. In this state, she could not talk to Kabil and explain something to him. First, she needed to get a divorce, put her feelings in order, and only then destroy the temple. She thought he wouldn't argue with her, but he still asked one question: why? She raised her head, looking in confusion, wondering if he had become close to the princess. So she said that he should marry the princess. The Duke was angry. Where did she get these thoughts from in the first place? They should have both clarified their feelings a long time ago. He hugged the Duchess and confidently told her of his intentions to live with her on this estate, and once again reminded her that he had no intention of divorcing her. The Duke promised that he would never do that. Even if they killed him or stabbed him, he still wouldn't sign this damn divorce contract. He repeated it many times, over and over again, that he would never leave her or divorce her. Never. She started to push him away, but he cried, saying that she always told him she loved him, constantly insisted on it. He continued to burst into tears and asked her to leave, no doubt that this was not true, because she had always said it over and over again. She said that her feelings for him were real. If that's the case, then why is she now breaking his heart with her coldness? He rested his head on her shoulder again and continued to cry like the little boy she remembered. But she stood still. Her body seemed to have turned into stone, immobile and cold. What was happening at all? Her world seemed to have turned upside down. Finally, she began to understand that Kabil had no intention of marrying Princess Larissa, so it turns out they were not in love at all. But she couldn't believe that Kabil saw her as a woman and not a sister, because his meeting with the princess happened just like in the story earlier. The time she spent with him and said she loved him was a long time ago, back in childhood, but it wasn't serious. They were just children. That's how she wrote him letters when he was at war, and that's how she wrote that she loved him, but didn't see romantic feelings in it. She assured Kabil that he had forgotten, because what he was feeling was a mistake. For him, she was more like a sister or a mother, which is why he thought he loved her. The girl tried to finish, but he stopped her and said in a cold voice that he had neither a mother nor a sister, and his only family was his wife. He took her by the waist and pulled her towards him, continuing the following: "He doesn't care about a princess or even an empress. He doesn't need them because..." Pulling her even closer to him, and in a nervous tone he said, "I love only you, Elodie. You are my wife." He finally said what he had to and understood. He had loved her since he was young, but then the feeling was a little different. This burning feeling inside, as if he had swallowed fire, couldn't be love. At first he thought so. Elodie still has a slight misunderstanding of how the plot could have changed. She said that he and the princess were created by fate, and it was clear to anyone who looked at them. But he was already confident in himself, and took her hand, kissed it, and said that his only destiny was her, and that is why the Duchess would never run away from him again. For if she had forgotten, they were husband and wife. She trembled at his words and kisses. Even the mention of the princess brought out the fire of evil in his eyes. Finally, Elodie realized that she had ruined the original plot a long time ago. Kabul sat lost in thought. In reality, he knew that his and his wife's hearts desired different things. Those words of hers, as if he and Princess Larissa were made for each other, were why everyone, including her, was obsessed with setting him up with that woman. He didn't even want to hear it. Even if he was truly the princess's destiny, he would still change the plot of this story. That's when Marie found him, sitting alone in the middle of the hallway on the floor, holding his head. She asked what he was doing here. Since it was already morning and he was still awake, silently got up and went somewhere. He was walking too determinedly, determined for something. He couldn't wait any longer and went straight to the princess's bedroom. She got flustered and started to apply makeup to look more beautiful, but the maid assured her that everything was fine and she needed to go out because the Duke was waiting. She was very pleased. He must have changed his mind and felt something for her. She left without expecting what awaited her. Opening the door, she saw before her not the Duke, but Count Dufoyer. She only asked what had happened. When the Duke came up behind them and said it was time for them to pack their things and go back to the castle, they had already staying with them. His eyes seemed to light up with fire, and he shouted in words full of rage, "Get out immediately!" An hour later, carriages were already leaving the Cernois estate. The servants were confused, not understanding why there was such a rush, but they still left the house. Caroline argued, wondering what could have happened and why the Duke had thrown them out. At this time, the princess was very upset. The emperor's plan had failed, and with it, her hopes for marriage. She remembered the Duke's face full of rage, how he had driven them out. The Count had threatened him that if he drove them out, the emperor would not forgive him. However, Kabyle said that he had already done everything the emperor asked for. He had won the damn war, signed the documents the emperor demanded, and accepted them. Kabyle insisted that they stay, and if he had done everything the emperor wanted, then why were they still hanging around in someone else's house? Larissa knew she couldn't just leave. She still had to reveal Elodie's evil side. Maybe then he would change his mind. She couldn't believe he was standing so close, in front of her, but instead of the desired words of love, he showed her where the door was. How jealous she was of the Duchess. The princess's house burned down to the ground due to an attack by the Kingdom of Earth. Her mother and father were killed, and she had nothing left. But the Duchess had everything: a beautiful large castle, a greenhouse and a laboratory, lovely servants and loyal knights, and even the Duke of Cernois himself belonged to her. The Duchess had everything she had lost and wanted to take back. It was not fair to her. After all, she considered herself the ideal main character, and the Duchess was bad, so why was she still alive? She fell into despair. She desperately wanted to take everything she had from Elodie. She wanted revenge. Caroline saw the princess's condition and reassured her, promising her that they would return. Although they were retreating now, they would come again. Larissa seemed to come to life again. The thought that they would return gave her hope that everything could still be fixed. So she decided, very soon she would return much stronger and take everything from the Duchess. The Count in the next carriage was also thinking about how to punish the Duke. No one had ever dared to expel him. The Emperor would not let it go so easily. He knew that even a war hero would be punished for betraying the trust of the Emperor and his loyal servant and princess. He looked out of the window and saw how soon the Duke of Cernois would pay for everything, and his house would burn in flames. Some others also wondered what had happened, because the Duke had summoned the priest to him to complain about his knights. How dare the commander of the Holy Army touch his wife? Is that really what they teach in the temple? Of course, the priest denied it, but it was necessary to investigate. He stared at Theodore for a long time, the Duke's words replaying in his mind. Soon he was going to find out the truth. Theodore, it seems, did not suspect their intentions, but upon arrival at the temple, he was still being checked. The Duchess was drinking her medicinal tea at this time, no longer hiding from Marie, although Marie was frightened when she saw the blood on her handkerchief. She wanted to call a doctor, but Elodie forbade her, so she asked what had happened at the estate and why their guests had suddenly left them so quickly. Marie herself did not know the reason. She only heard that since the very morning the Duke had expelled them all, both the imperial ambassadors and the people from the temple and even the princess. Marie wasn't afraid to ask Elodie what had happened between them, but she asked because she had seen the Duke alone in the hallway that morning. She said that his eyes were red. It seemed like he hadn't slept at all. Elodie calmly said that it was because he was afraid she would run away. He acted like a child, but the fact that he kicked them all out probably had terrible consequences for them. But did he really do it because of her? She wondered for a long time. Was it because of her words about the princess? He decided to prove it to her. Elodie exhaled and held her head. It was her mistake again, because she thought they were already together. Then the people were expelled from the temple, probably because of Sir Theodore and the jealousy of Cabell. When they were alone and the Duke came, it must have been because of his gaze, but it really seemed to her as if they had been caught cheating, because from the outside, it looked that way. If he kicked everyone out, then it really hurt his ego, and he's not the kind of person who will tolerate it. Then she was convinced. She told Marie that she needed to see her husband immediately. It seemed they really needed to talk. They sat at the table and drank tea, not saying a word at first. It was awkward. But Elodie dared to ask why he had kicked out all their guests that morning. The day before, he had talked to Ifrit, telling him that he had finally understood his feelings and that he loved his wife. Ifrit laughed out loud. How does the guy even know what love is? Well, tell us what you felt. So, once when he thought about her, his chest would feel warm and tender, but now it felt like it was on fire. It burned so hard, as if a real flame had been lit in his chest. Then, Ifrit said that Kabeel had finally truly understood what love was. But it seemed to him that the problem was not with his wife at all. His wife seemed not to understand him. He wanted her to love him too, and feel the flame that he felt in his chest. So Ifrit offered him his help. Kabeel already knew that he would talk about exposing his torso. Ifrit got angry that it wasn't his fault that the previous plan didn't work out. Ifrit scolded the boy for being too naive for his age, for being too innocent, for it was time for him to grow up. On the battlefield, he never interacted with knights outside of training, so he didn't learn what he should have learned naturally. Ifrit decided to take on his upbringing as his older brother, asking only to trust him, and he would do everything. In any case, they are no longer children, and everything is different now, so we should have listened to him. If he really wanted his wife to fall in love, then he needed to stop acting like a child. Stop crying, blowing your cheeks, and not getting offended for every reason. And most importantly, don't impose your feelings on her. If he heeds this advice, then success will be guaranteed, Ifrit promised. He also added that you can't say things like before, I love you but you don't love me. It's forbidden. Such thoughts will only scare her. In any case, I advised her to let her figure out her feelings a little on her own, and try to be more intelligent. Finally, Kabeel understood. Then the question arose of what to do next. Where to start? She had to fall in love with Kabeel. And what do women like, right? Handsome men. So Ifrit told Kabeel to look in the mirror. Appearance is the most important thing. Kabeel sat in front of the mirror and practiced looking at himself. Ifrit became flustered and admitted that he himself knew little about love. It seems someone knocked on the door. Oh no, it was Elodie's voice. She came to him first. That's exactly what happened, and here they were drinking tea in his office, not daring to talk. However, Elodie still asked why he had sent the imperial delegation from the estate and also expelled the Knights Templar. He had expected this question and calmly replied that their time was up and it was time for them to return, and he saw no danger to himself in this. To change the subject, Kabeel asked ahead of time why she wanted the Duke to marry Princess Larissa. Of course she thought she should answer, yes, but her heart didn't want that anymore, so she said let him do as he wanted. What if I don't want to? Asked Kabeel. Elodie's face was clearly surprised, but wasn't that what she wanted? She looked at him because she couldn't even think about such a situation, because it was a fate decided by the author of the story. With her head down in frustration, she decided she couldn't force him, even if he didn't want to stick to the plot. But was it just because they spent their entire childhood together, she just wanted to give him a better future, without realizing that it would bring them so close. Unlike the original, she treated him very well. But how foolish she was to still continue to believe that Kabeel was wrong in his feelings for her just because they had grown up together. She truly believed that only the memories of his childhood kept him with her, because after the orphanage, she was the only one who really cared for him. But of course, Kabeel saw a woman in her. He could not listen to Ifrit's advice, and said with a smile how much he loved Elodie. He laughed, remembering that she might have thought she could only be a sister or a mother to him. But is there even one person who could feel such feelings for a mother or sister? It seems she was very stupid in matters of love, because since when did she become so awkward and he so confident? Continuing to joke about her, he asked if she was really going to get a divorce, and where she would go after the divorce. Circa couldn't just help her escape like that. Elodie shared with him the experience that during the war, gossip reached her, which is why she was sure that he would marry the princess. He asked what about her. What was she going to do next? Go and find a new husband and get married. It was that simple. Elodie admitted that she hadn't even thought about it, but anything could happen, because no one knows what will happen tomorrow. The Duke was angry, but warned that divorce was not possible, and he was not going to impose his feelings on her. He promised her that he would do everything possible to make her feel the same way he did, no matter what it cost him, and asked her to just wait for that day. But if after all his efforts she still wants a divorce, then he will have no choice but to sign the papers. Well, she didn't have any better options anyway, and the estate next to Kabyle was her home, so she reluctantly agreed. But Kabyle calmed down a little, until his efforts achieved what he wanted, until he stopped, and Elodie promised to wait. He was ready to give his life for her, but if she didn't appreciate that, then he would let her go, even though it would hurt, but he was ready to do anything for her. But in his cunning intentions, he knew that even if she left, he would still be there, watching over and protecting her. Most importantly, Elodie wanted to save Kabyle's life, so she decided to tell him about the emperor and the temple's intentions. They needed a plan. She told him all the details of their evil plan that she knew. Kabyle admitted that he had guessed it, but was confident in his abilities, and that they would not succeed in doing it. She wanted to know how strong Kabyle was, and of course this was a chance for him to show his best side. So he swore that he would be able to protect her and the estate. It is true, in these 7 years, he had changed a lot, and his strength and fortitude had multiplied each other. Elodie found it funny because he had truly grown up and become a man, but he still acted like a child. After all, he was only 18 years old. He was so sweet that she actually had to put aside thoughts of divorce. Now she has a new goal, to protect Kabyle. To gain more power, they had to strengthen the strength of their possessions. They needed more possessions than they do now. At this time, the maids were cleaning the estate and were very happily discussing the former guests. How glad they were that these annoying rich people were gone. Suddenly, the new maid asked the other girls why the Duchess and her husband were sleeping separately, to which they replied that the Duchess was sick and did not want her husband to know. The maids became too absorbed in talking about the Duchess and her illness, and other girls came up to them, each telling what she knew. But one of the knights sneaked up from behind and said that this disease is called Siren's Tears, frightening the girls with his sudden appearance. The maids excitedly asked what he knew about this disease, and of course, he shared that she could die from this disease if it was too late to treat it. The girls almost cried when they heard such terrible news, and they were even more surprised how Heinz could know so much about the Duchess. After all, he was her enemy. The maids gossiped about how they could help the Duchess, because if the knight's words were true, their sweet Elodie could die very soon. At this time, Elodie suspected nothing and worked in the laboratory, studying herbal books. But obsessive thoughts about the princess kept her awake. Maybe nothing terrible would really happen if Kabyle didn't marry Larissa. Thoughts of anxiety never left her, as if someone had put it into her head that he should only be with the princess and that Elodie was not worthy of him. She decided that she was worrying too much, because every time her head was spinning, similar thoughts would come to her, as if someone were whispering them in her ear. Marie distracted the Duchess because Elodie wanted to understand the temple's plan, so she asked to send someone to the Merchant Guild. She wanted to talk to Circa and discover the secret of the artifact in the temple, but first, she had to get rid of their influence on the Duke. In fact, Kabyle should not take anyone's side. He has had independent possessions from the very beginning, which were conquered by the first Duke and not the Emperor. They have always maintained their independence, but it seems that this is no longer enough. They need economic power to influence the entire capital and the entire continent. While she was risking her life searching for the herb to save her, she had many ideas in her head. Now it was time to put them into action. She was thinking about what medicine she would create next, to earn more money, but someone knocked on the door. Maybe Marie had returned. But the surprise was when Heinz came in. His face was very depressed. It seemed like he wanted to say something. She asked in surprise why he had come. Had he really told anyone her biggest secret? He knelt down in front of the Duchess and began to bang his head on the floor so that the floorboards cracked. The Duchess argued with him about why he was still silent. He would break her head, and she would never know anything. He started to apologize, begged her many times not to scold him. Of course, she started to worry about what he had done. Although the Duchess had asked him not to tell anyone about her illness, he decided that the maids already knew those words. Elodie was barely breathing, angrily shouting for him to immediately name those who knew about her. So he admitted that he had told the maids, but that was because the servants had probably known about the Duchess's illness for a long time. But there must be a reason why everyone is keeping it a secret. Okay, Duchess, why are the servants silent? But that wasn't the point. Heinz, kneeling, apologized because all this time he had misunderstood and judged Elodie, wanting to see the princess in her place. He considered the Duchess a narcissistic and vicious woman. Well, that wasn't what Elodie expected to hear, and why he had even brought up the subject. She told him that she knew most of the mercenaries didn't like or support her, but it still hurt her to hear it out loud. But Elodie forgave him. Then, Heinz added that he also considered her an evil and mercantile witch, but she shut him up in time and would probably change her mind about forgiving him. He apologized and said that it was his mistake. He had wasted a lot of time hating her. That's why he came to ask for forgiveness. She asked him to get up from his knees before anyone came and saw this, otherwise they would take it the wrong way. He looked truly terrible, sad and with a broken forehead. He seemed really sorry. When he got up, he hit his chest and shouted, promising her that from this day forward, he would serve her faithfully and never leave her. Of course, she asked why all this was happening, but Heinz couldn't help it, especially after she forgave him for his disappointment in her. While she herself did not yet understand why she had forgiven him, he wished her love with the Duke, saying that he believed they were destined for each other. He admitted that he decided to help her because he sees the silhouette of his sister in her, so he won't forgive himself if he doesn't save her. To prove his loyalty, he even promised to kill anyone she pointed her finger at, secretly of course, in one fell swoop. He's a mercenary. The day had been hard enough, and here he was with his loyalty. Elodie asked him to go somewhere first, otherwise her head was already hurting from his screaming. Pushing him out the door, she threatened that if she found out he had told anyone else her secret, she would finish him off before he could blink. But this fool was not ashamed to ask at the last moment how much longer she had to live. She got angry and said that her illness was not the siren's tears, and it was not for him to treat it. He asked excitedly if it was true, and she tried to cover his mouth so that no one would hear their conversation. Her anger was already at its peak, and he continued to talk and shout about his loyalty and that he would eliminate anyone who interfered with her. But Heinz was the one who was messing up the most, so she kicked him in the ass, and he quickly flew out of the lab. He even fell to his knees, turned around to ask again how long she had to live, and she shouted after him that she was not yet at the point of death. How relieved she felt when he left. She could get back to her business. Taking up the documents, she studied the potions she would soon prepare, and then she came across one potion that would be the doom for everyone. The herb Ferrophasia, a hybrid of a common wound-healing herb and a sedative that she once combined with magic for better results. Before she found her flower of salvation, out of sadness, she began mixing herbs herself, departing from recipes. And so she created something new. When two herbs and her mani merged into one, a herb with entirely new abilities was born. Well, of course, it wasn't without its failures. A couple of times ordinary grass and even poisonous plants came out. All sorts of things happened. But this herb, Ferocia, has one small feature, namely that it helps with hair loss. And these very places where grass needs to grow are the property of Baron Wells. Only here's the thing, he's bald. That's when she had a great idea, to use the Baron as a test subject because there was no better option. And without thinking for a long time, she invited the Baron to visit. He, sitting in the hall of her estate, tearfully thanked the Duchess for saving him from her husband. He was supposed to go to the Forest of Death, but the Duchess changed her husband's mind and pardoned him, but she would take her own payment for it. Since the Baron himself said she could ask for anything, she immediately took out the pills she wanted to test on him, the remedy for baldness that she developed. But the Baron didn't like this idea. For some reason, he didn't want to be a rat for experiments, but he liked being a rat in politics, strangely enough. She laughed and reassured him that on the plus side, he wouldn't die, but there could be side effects. So he had no other option but to agree with her and take one jar to test. When he was about to leave, he finally asked if she had any brothers or sisters with the same hair color. He explained that Iris's first love was with pink hair, and she is very insistent on finding her lover. Even before she found herself in this body, Elodie's memories were gradually fading. But she still remembered that Count Maclair had many children, and most of them were illegitimate, but only those born from a legitimate wife had pink hair, including Elodie, and apparently another brother. So she shared these memories with the Count, telling him about her brother, whom she had not seen since she moved to this castle. The Count thanked her, said goodbye, and she asked him to return when the medicine took effect. He agreed, and she thought it was a good thing she didn't have to take other measures, and he agreed so easily. After all, Kabil also really wanted to be her test subject, but he already has too high ferritin and thick, shiny hair. But the Count from Brilliant only has a bald spot on his head, so he is the perfect man for these pills. Then she remembered that she should make amends for rejecting him, because he loves her so much, and she avoids him. Listening to his words about love, she still played the role of a victim and did not believe that she could be loved. She clenched her little fist and frowned, angry because she thought she had predicted the future, but everything had not gone according to plan. Because of her thoughts, she started to get a severe headache, as if something was squeezing her head, and white noise began to sound. Marie tried to help her somehow, asking if everything was okay, and holding the Duchess so that she wouldn't fall. The voice in Elodie's head screamed that Kabil didn't love her. She couldn't hear anything else, except these words that someone was whispering right in her head. And in a minute it stopped. She even thought she had made it up. She decided to deal with it herself, so she reassured Marie that everything was fine, and she would handle it on her own. Elodie had never heard of magic that could control someone, but apparently Kabil's unexpected confession simply alarmed her greatly. A few days later, she completely forgot about the incident and was just enjoying her days. There was a guest in her office who was hard to recognize at first, but it was the Count, the same one whose bald spot had recently shown on his head. Despite the thick hair on his head, he admitted that there was one side effect, pointing to their eyebrows that had fallen out. So to speak, they sacrificed themselves for the sake of baldness. Elodie tried to be restrained, although she, like your author, burst out laughing. The Duchess suggested that the Count create a cure for this side effect. It would take a few days, but he refused, saying that now there are cosmetics for men, and he would start drawing his eyebrows. He was very pleased with the result, so he asked to be called as soon as there were new experiments. She herself did not expect such a reaction from the Count, who until recently hated her and longed to see another woman in her place as the Duchess. Elodie asked the Count to take the pink rose bushes from the garden when he went home, because she had promised Iris to give them to her. If it hadn't been for Kabil, she would have completely forgotten about the young Countess. An hour before the Count arrived, he had cut a few branches for Elodie. Then she looked at them and told Kabil that these flowers were for Iris, and nothing would be left if he cut them. So if it weren't for Kabil's desire to comfort his wife, she wouldn't have kept her promise. Later, Marie came to the Duchess to ask what flowers they would plant in place of the pink roses. She thought about tulips. They had recently received incredible varieties of tulips from the merchants. Marie agreed to give the gardeners a task and said that she remembered the Duchess's love for tulips. Over the years of living together, she had already learned the preferences of her young mistress perfectly. Although at first, Elodie thought about the flowers of Euphoria, which Princess Larissa loved so much. But remembering Princess Larissa made her feel somehow unpleasant, so she quickly erased these memories from her head. At this time, Kabil sat holding his head and thought again. Instead of engaging in state affairs, he continued to suffer from his first love. He only had to close his eyes, and she would be standing in front of him with a suitcase, ready to leave. And he's the one who's constantly running after her and can't catch up. That's how relationships between couples sometimes are. And he was becoming increasingly afraid that one day she would finally abandon him and run away. It seems he's become paranoid, and if he keeps pestering her with such questions, she'll definitely get tired of him. But fortunately, he was distracted from these thoughts by his assistant Louis, who came with documents for the Duke. Kabil ordered him to call Sola. It seems he had a plan. Elodie, who was unsuspecting, was enjoying working in the garden. She was very pleased with herself. Finally, they got everything planted, and with the help of the servants, she finished it much faster. Although its power is not enough to fill the earth with mana, it is still quite capable of balancing the energy of the soil for a small garden. And indeed, when she fully focused on her strength, she heard a roar of delight behind her. The servants simply could not believe that, thanks to the Duchess, everything had grown so quickly, and indeed, the first shoots had already emerged. She felt that her magical power had increased, but she couldn't imagine it being so strong, so she decided to try it on other plants. And when she entered the greenhouse, she just stood there in shock and looked ahead. Just yesterday, when she was pouring magic into this little tree, she could not have imagined that today it would grow like this and bear its first fruits. That's when she saw Ifrit sleeping under a tree, and she had questions. Maybe it was he who poured mana into this garden and began to awaken it. It wasn't easy because he had just eaten and fallen asleep, but after a few attempts, he woke up, and she asked if he was involved, but he said it was her magic that was blocked and then broke through. Elodie remembered that her magic was indeed weak while she was being treated, so when she stopped taking the medicine, did her magic really increase so much? If you think about it, it seems like she hasn't felt tingling and numbness in her hands for a long time. Ifrit interrupted her as soon as he saw these giant peaches. He couldn't believe that they were so sweet and filled him with strength. To get mana, he had to train Kabil and listen to his whiny love stories, but now he can just fill her with peaches. Ifrit brought one for Elodie and said that she was so talented that he was ready to change the contract with the guy to a contract with her. When Elodie tried it, she was speechless. They were really so delicious and juicy. Ifrit was happy that now he would eat peaches every day. But the Duchess had other plans for them, and then she smelled the money she would make selling them. Ifrit immediately took back his words about the good Duchess when she said she expected something from him in return for the peaches. He said she was worse than Cable, because at least he didn't ask for money, and she reminded him that nothing in this world is free. The only thing he could offer in return was to burn something or a crystal, the only precious thing he had. This interested the Duchess. Another thing that could be experimented with, she carefully examined the crystal, which Ifrit had called elemental. In the library of great-grandfather Kabil, she read about this crystal in books. This is a condensed mana stone in its purest form, and was used not only for heating water or lighting rooms, but even when creating various magical tools and artifacts, it contains more energy than anything else. Ifrit said that for him, it was nothing more than trash that was worthless. Elodie couldn't believe that such a thing had just been called trash. She asked how many such crystals he could bring her, and how happy she was to hear that he was throwing them away, but if she needed them, he could bring them whenever he got them. Replacing expensive crystals with elemental ones will save them a lot of money and give them more energy. So they agreed to exchange peaches for crystals, and it was beneficial for both of them. So since they made a deal, the energy supply will be restored, and the Duke will keep his money. Elodie went to Kabil's office to share the good news. She knocked, but there was no answer. She knew that he had to be working at this time. It was strange that he didn't answer. He must be very busy, she thought. So she decided to go in to treat him to some peaches. She called out to him happily as she entered, and saw him sitting on the couch with some documents in his hands. Elodie came closer and saw that he was fast asleep. He must have been very tired. She smiled at how cute he was when he was sleeping and took the documents from his hands to leave on the table. The Duchess believed that there was nothing more beautiful than a person who was passionate about their work and worked until they were exhausted. When she saw how skillfully Kabil worked, for a second she thought he was handsome. And indeed, his sweet face, full of kindness, and at the same time severity, gave him a special charisma. But that was all, nothing more. She thought it wasn't a feeling that Kabil was full of. Maybe it was just politeness. She stroked his head then, as she had done every day as a child. All this time, she was sure that Kabil's feelings were a lie, and that no one would truly love her. But this look, when he saw her look, he couldn't help but put his hand on her waist. And then, with a light movement of his hand, he pulled her towards him and sat her on his lap, gently saying, "My wife." He looked her straight in the eye, smiling, just enjoying the moment before she ran away. Then he asked if she had woken up long ago. Elodie was puzzled by such a surge of love from her husband. He laughed and said that she used to sit him on her lap like that when he was little, but now it would be the other way around. He assured her that everything she had done for him before, he would return now, but many times more. When Kabil behaves like this, it seems like a stranger to her, but it's hard to accept it as something more when they grew up as brother and sister. That's why she felt very uncomfortable with his deep gaze. So as soon as she could, she got up from his bed and started running away. As she ran to the exit, she shouted at him that he couldn't behave like that with people older than him. He was also scared because he didn't understand what he had done wrong and why she was running away again. He caught up with her and tried to stop her, asking her not to run away from him. When she put her hand on the doorknob, he grabbed her hand too and held it, begging her not to leave. He stood behind her and assured her that it was just a joke. He didn't want to offend her, and he definitely didn't want her to disappear again. She saw him apologize from the bottom of his heart and couldn't help but stop. No matter how she tried, she couldn't resist such a cute guy, even though she contradicted herself in her feelings. They reconciled and sat together discussing matters. He suggested that she have a knight by her side for protection, because after all there was danger. At first she wanted to refuse, but he insisted, so here too she couldn't argue with him. It's all because she was somehow uncomfortable with Sola. She's always joking and teasing her. But still, Kabil made such a decision and met with Sola and gave her an order. She herself was surprised when she was asked to guard the Duchess. He asked her to tell him immediately if his wife tried to go anywhere. She didn't understand where the Duchess could be going, so she asked him. But he assured her that there would be no explanations and that wherever she went, she would notify him and keep a close eye on him. Well, it was all resolved before he even asked Elodie's permission and changed the subject by praising what a delicious harvest his wife had produced. His wife shared with him the news about the garden and the find of Ifrit, which made her very happy. Kabil himself was glad that Ifrit had finally shown some sense and praised his wife for her talent. She looked at her husband and asked if he was upset that she was communicating with Ifrit and that he wanted her to be his owner. And then she laughed when he replied that he really didn't like it, but he would put up with it for her. And then she was embarrassed when she remembered the temple, which would be even angrier if Ifrit became her property. He was confused by the fact that his wife really didn't notice anything because he confessed his love to her, and she pretended not to hear. His feelings stirred again, and he took her hand and asked her to listen to him for at least a minute. He really wanted to discuss their rooms and why they shouldn't sleep together. But at this important moment for him, they were interrupted by a maid who brought a letter from the Merchant Guild. Elodie instantly got up and headed for the exit, promising Kabil that they would definitely talk later. He was upset, but there was nothing he could do. She was so worried. His wife left the room, and with it, his good mood. And he tried for so long to understand women's logic and find a moment to talk, but it didn't work out. But Elodie read the letter, saying that the further they go, the stranger things get. It seems like there's a much greater force behind this than they thought. He will arrive soon and tell you what he found out, especially about the red painkillers. Someone is trying to slander her medicine by making low-quality copies, for which they can later blame her. But they felt at least better knowing that Serki would soon arrive and tell them everything he had found out. Marie comforted Elodie by telling her that she was going to pick peaches for pies. Then the Duchess remembered how much Kabil loved fruit tarts as a child. So she asked Marie to teach her how to make such tarts, and she agreed. As expected, Kabil loved it immensely, especially when his wife prepared it. She used to often make tarts for him, but after his return, for the first time, it seems to her that she devotes too little time to him. Next time, she promised to bake for him with whatever fruit he chose. He was smiling, a little dirty, but so happy that his wife was taking care of him. She moved closer to him to wipe the crumbs off his face, and he stopped breathing for a moment and looked at her. She looked at him, pretending as if nothing had happened, knowing that she should behave as usual. It seemed as if he was the same little boy she remembered. Her delicate fingers on his lips tempted him, and he gently called her by name, looking straight into her eyes. She walked away, sat back down on the couch, and apologized for behaving like that. She just wanted to help. And then she said it was time for her to go, but they would see each other tomorrow. But as soon as she walked out the door, voices appeared in her head again, whispering various nasty words to her. The voices in her head told her that he didn't love her, and she didn't deserve him, making her doubt her feelings. And it seems they were trying to drive her crazy by constantly whispering. But Kabil continued to look for some hints in his wife's actions, and he doesn't really like sweets right now. But if his wife cooks, then it's a completely different matter, and he's ready to eat straight from her hands. He felt love again in her actions. If she cooks for him with her own hands, it means she loves him but doesn't say it. Maybe over time, she'll realize that she loves him too. The next day, he was at a meeting with his knights, and he told me that he had eaten a peach tart that the Duchess had prepared. He proudly told them that she baked it herself, but didn't want to treat others. They simply couldn't believe it when they saw how pleased he was. The Duke, who had always been cold, smiling. One of the knights said that the Duchess brought it to them to try, for which the others shut him up, ordering to be silent otherwise will anger the Duke and arouse his jealousy. All the other knights also praised Elodie, but he got angry and said, "Of course she's talented, she's my wife." And then he noticed that several of them had broken heads and asked what had happened to them. But they shrugged it off as if nothing had happened. One just fell and the other kept training, banging his head against the wall. But there was still one person among all who dared to be impudent and ask, "Will you not correct me?" He asked the Duke why he had sent the princess to the castle when she could have been the perfect Duchess, saying that he had never seen anyone more beautiful Then that woman who walked at night like a forest fairy. I thought the princess loved this place so much, but they took her and just kicked her out. He wanted to hear an explanation of what the princess had done to be banished, while the others wondered when someone had gone over to Larissa's side. Kabil was angry at the mention of the princess. It spoiled his whole mood. He said that he did not want to keep people from the castle in his house who behaved here without respect for the owners of the house. And he warned that, if he heard anything like that again, he would cut off his head and hang it on the castle gate. And then he just turned around and walked away, angry. The knights were so bewildered that they were afraid to even think about the princess, let alone speak. To them, the duke's actions were strange. The next morning, Brian stood before the duke, awaiting further orders. He asked why the knights were talking about some kind of divorce, and he didn't know anything, although he thought this topic had been closed for a long time. Brian himself was surprised to hear this. Where did the duke find out about the gossip? He explained that when the princess arrived at the castle, gossip spread among the knights that you were planning a divorce and had found a new bride. The duke insisted that they knew perfectly well that he wasn't even thinking about it, but Brian reminded them that the duke had never said that in front of everyone, so how could they know? Then he became even more angry, because it turned out that it was his fault, but Brian asked to listen to the knights who were loyal to him. Kabil emphasized that the knights should know how much he loves his wife, and that, so that she does not run away, let them all watch over her together. And I decided it was time to combine the bedrooms so that she couldn't refuse. Elodie heard someone whispering behind her, but she looked around because they were interfering with her work. At first, she thought that Sola would interfere with her, but everything turned out better than she expected. Sola, along with the maids, helped with the plants. Probably because she also stopped teasing the Duchess like she did in childhood, and if she doesn't annoy her, that's good. And if she had more time now, she decided to use it to study crystals. She was curious about what else they were capable of and where they might be useful. The book said that they even create ancient artifacts, and then she could create several of them. And perhaps they can be used not only for this, but also to create potions or grow magical herbs. And what if you combine the two? You might be able to create any potion you want, and if you research them together with the Faraphesia herb and create an incredible potion that no one knows about yet, maybe we can even cure the world's most incurable disease. At tea with her husband, they were chatting pleasantly when the Duke wanted to say something. He shared rumors that their servants were upset about something, namely that they were sleeping in different rooms, and saying that they wanted to get a divorce. And he also knew that she was very worried about the servants, and if he told her that the servants were worried about them too, maybe she would change her mind. And indeed, in her eyes, he saw concern for such gossip and for the feelings of the servants. He made a sad face and said that he saw the maids crying, especially Mary, who cried the most, and even the knights too. The Duchess listened attentively, as the Emperor also spread gossip about her and Larissa, and when she arrived, the couple were in different bedrooms. He clenched his fist and said confidently that right now they should show how strong their marriage was, and as a ruler, he wanted it to happen today. She thought about it, and not sensing any deceit in his words, agreed to sleep in the same bed with her husband. It was impossible to describe his joy, which he tried his best not to show, and to prove to her that it was important. Reminded that such gossip could weaken their duchy from within when they were on the verge of war with the king. Besides, the temple is trying to harm him. What if they attack at night? He will take care of himself, but if they go to her first, she will be in danger if he is not around. He said that because of this anxiety, he hasn't been able to sleep lately because when his wife isn't around, he has nightmares like he did in childhood. So, taking her hand, he said gently, "Maybe we should sleep together again," although he didn't insist, but it was for safety's sake. Since he was right, she also thought that bad gossip and quarrels between them would not be to their benefit. And then she thought that if a killer really broke into their room in the middle of the night, they would protect each other. And she told him that they really should live in the same bedroom and sleep together so that there wouldn't be such bad gossip. But she asked for something in return, which he definitely didn't expect, and was surprised about. Pointing with her fingers, she said that they needed 2 beds, and then she would be satisfied. Although he agreed, he knew that over time, he would solve this problem, and she would end up in the same bed with him. Elodie was working in the garden and was very busy taking care of the plants. Then she noticed something that she hadn't felt before. At first it seemed like a but. She no longer heard voices. Her head had been calmer than ever lately, whereas it had been before. That's when she saw Ifrit and asked if he was feeling it too. He said he felt the ground tremble and the air become clearer. She just planted a seed created with the crystal he gave her. Maybe it's because of him. Just then, Marie came running and called the Duchess to see something. When they entered the garden, they saw a forest in front of them, where she had just planted the seeds. They couldn't believe their eyes that it was because of this forest that the earth trembled and the air became incredibly clean. The trees that had grown so sparsely now stood like a wall and grew even larger, with incredible speed. Looking at her hand, Elodie was horrified that this was all thanks to her magic, which had now grown and become stronger. Standing in front of a huge forest, she looked around until she finally noticed something. She came closer and looked behind the tree and saw mushrooms. But equals autumn is still so far away, and mushrooms grow here. And then I noticed strawberries that weren't there a few minutes ago. The forest continued to grow. She bent down to pick a few berries and taste them. And imagine her surprise when it turned out to be very sweet, and it all grew like magic, without the sun and in minutes. Then she felt more than just the taste of sweet strawberries. She got a taste of the money that would pour in on them once they started selling her. She still couldn't believe that the forest was growing so quickly, and that a river had appeared there and was getting bigger, she told Kabyle. She also said that there were more fish there, and that tomorrow she would order the servants to go and try to catch some. The Duke said that he would go and catch fish for her himself, and if she wished it, he would cancel all his affairs for her sake. It seems only his assistant Louis is unaware that tomorrow is a day off, and the Duke will be collecting fish instead of documents. And her husband reminded her that they had agreed to sleep together today, reminded his wife before she changed her mind. Elodie laughed and agreed, and then he offered her his hand and suggested they go get ready for bed. It seems the maids didn't expect this, but Marie was very pleased that it finally happened. Marie prepared a bath full of petals and roses for the Duchess, and Elodie asked why she was suddenly throwing petals here. And she just smiled, which scared the girl, and she asked what the maid was up to. Although Marie said that a girl should be taught everything before marriage, she still reminded her once again how everything happens when a couple sleeps together. After hearing this, she felt uneasy. She blushed, and even thinking about it made her uncomfortable. And then she looked at Marie and got angry, because for her, Kabyle was still a child, and the maid no longer considered it that way. It was at that moment that the voice in her head reappeared, accompanied by a sharp pain. All those terrible words oppressed her. Marie was worried and tried to ask the Duchess if something was bothering her and if she needed a doctor. Then Elodie said what the voice in her head whispered to her, that Kabyle already had a destined match, and it was a princess. And then she reminded him that he was just a child, so she strictly ordered Marie not to say such nasty things to her Duchess. But at the same moment, when the voice fell silent, she lowered her head and realized that he was not going to leave her and that this was impossible to bear. Marie also noticed something strange in Elodie's actions as soon as she felt some strange anxiety for her Duchess. She stood alone in the middle of the room and exhaled heavily, something she had been worrying about a lot lately. It seemed to her that it was probably the excitement over the words Marie had said, the thought that her relationship with her husband was no longer childish, that made her panic. And then again that voice in her head, reminding her that she was not his match and that she should leave him. For some reason, this voice bothered her every time she thought about him, and at that moment he was standing behind her. When she felt movement behind her, she looked back to see Kabyle watching her fondly. Moreover, looking at him, she realized that the voices had been haunting her ever since he confessed his love to her. Panicking, she turned away from him and said that he had grown up a lot. She told him she would sleep on the windowside, and he laughed that she thought she would save him if a murderer climbed in through the window. She lay down in bed on the windowside, not knowing that the window was guarded by Ifrit, making sure no one climbed in. The Duke went to bed, thinking that he couldn't be a boy she had to protect forever. He was already a grown man who could take care of her himself. Elodie couldn't sleep and asked if he was comfortable sleeping facing her because she wasn't very comfortable. She was angry with Marie for telling her that, and now all she thinks about is what you thought. Then she heard his voice. He asked, could his beloved wife really not sleep? Then she turned her head and saw Kabyle in front of her, offering to sing her a lullaby or give her a hug. Elodie assured her that she didn't need it, but she knew why he said that, because that's what she did when he was little and couldn't sleep. The girl looked at him because he had grown so much and become so, in a word, she was proud of him, and yet, this look of his, as if it didn't matter. Her cheeks were already burning from Mary's words. And then there was this look. She saw the depth of his eyes and how much he truly loved her, but she still didn't know what answer to give him. It was a strange feeling that she couldn't describe yet, so she hid under the blanket and wished him good night. In the morning, Marie made the bed and talked to Anne. It seemed to her that something was wrong with the Duchess. Anne asked what she meant, but she retracted her words and said that she should forget this conversation. And in general, she thought that the Duchess had been feeling much better lately, but only after that conversation. She wasn't sure anymore, especially after the gossip that Elodie was sick of Siren's tears, because Heinz said so. And how could Heinz know about her illness if everyone knew that he was not a big fan of the Duchess, which is not true. It was then that she decided that she would tell the Duke everything if strange things happened, but for now she would just watch. But Kabyle didn't sleep because he kept an eye on his wife all night, watching how sweetly she slept. He watched and smiled because he had been waiting for so long for them to be together again, even if not in the same bed, but in the same bedroom. He held her hand and imagined everything they could experience if they were together. He even thought that he was ready to give up sleep for the rest of his life, if only she would continue to fall asleep next to him. Of course, he even admitted that he would like something more, but for now he will be content with what he has. Elodie didn't understand why Knights had been chasing her lately, and hence was the one hanging around the most. He came, as if with the intention of helping her work in the garden. And for this purpose, he brought several more boys, whom he ordered to put on happy faces and obey the Duchess. But Elodie refused him, saying that she had enough people, and she didn't know that her husband had ordered it. Hence disagreed, begging to be given work. So Sola advised the Duchess to use these pumped-up fools who only know how to measure themselves with their muscles. Then Elna thought that this was not a bad idea, and they would get it done faster, so she asked the guys to get to work and clean up the area. The women watched him and wondered why he was acting so strangely. Their instincts told them he had something to hide. Then Lady Sola asked the Duchess if she ever wondered why he was hanging around her like that, but the Duchess didn't know either and was curious. Sola reminded him that he had recently hated Elodie, but she herself knew that his behavior raised questions, and he was like that because he knew about her illness. Whatever it was, clearing that territory wasn't easy, and with the soldiers who didn't tolerate her, she was afraid she would make it even worse. So she had the idea to make them some fruit punch and enlisted Marie and Anne to help. The women got to work because the men were working so hard. They wanted something cool to drink. Elodie went to visit the Knights and asked Hence how they were, and if they were tired, and thanked him for his help. In gratitude, she said that she and the girls had prepared punch for them and wanted to treat everyone, but Marie wasn't happy about it. Heinz was very happy and thanked him, but the other Knights didn't look too happy to see the Duchess. Although they admitted that she wasn't as bad as they thought, and as the gossip said about her, they couldn't love her right away. They also thought that she would look after the Knights for their past, like other Knights who stay at court during war, but she is not like that. And from the very beginning, the Duchess never denied them recognition as true Knights. And all they wanted was to be recognized as ducal Knights, and it seems that now they are really starting to feel that way. Sitting under a tree, the Knights thought about how good it was to live here, and it seemed that they had followed the commander to this duchy for a reason. Elodie took another portion of punch for Kabyle and went to the river because he was fishing there. Then Heinz caught up with her, offered his help, and took the plate from her so that she wouldn't have to carry something heavy, not knowing that she took everything herself to give the maids and Knights a chance to rest. And here he is. Seeing the wound on his forehead, she asked why he hadn't treated it yet. Maybe he needed her help, but he smiled and said that for him, this was a sign of his loyalty to the commander. She took the dishes and told him that he had better keep his loyalty to the Duke, and to her, if he continues to remain silent. As they were talking, they were interrupted by the voice of the Duke, who was fishing ahead. He stood there, waving to her, holding a bucket in his hand, and saying that he had caught a lot of fish for his wife. He started coming out of the river and showing how many fish he had caught. The Duke was very happy that he had fulfilled his wife's wish, but she didn't look happy, but rather confused by his appearance, and asked where the Duke's clothes were. At the same moment, she handed Hence the punch bowl, turned around, and started running away so as not to think about his magnificent forms. Kabyle didn't understand what had happened, how he had already managed to offend her by making her run away. He came out of the water and approached Hence, who handed him the punch that the Duchess had prepared for him. But the Duke stopped when he saw that Heinz had taken out a handkerchief and started wiping his forehead, which was sweating from the heat. Then he asked where that scoundrel had gotten his wife's handkerchief. Heinz immediately remembered the Duke's words about what would happen to those who even thought about his wife. Kabul came even closer and asked why this handkerchief was in the knight's hands when it was his wife's handkerchief. He turned white with anxiety and said that he had found her behind the garden. She must have lost it. It seems that the Duke did not really believe his words, but nevertheless warned him not to see his wife's things in his hands again. And when he was going to the castle, he ordered the knight to wash this handkerchief thoroughly and bring it to him without a drop of dirt or odor on it. And when Kabul passed by without touching him, Heinz was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, for he had been a moment away from death. Marie stood in the doorway, holding a glass of black raspberries. She knocked on the door, waiting for permission to enter. When she was given permission, she joyfully opened the door, greeted the Duke, and entered. Anne was there too, happily savoring the black raspberries they had plucked from the garden today and asking what they were good for. Elodie thought for a moment and blushed a little, not knowing what to say. But still, she secretly told the girls that this raspberry is primarily good for men and affects their, shall we say, desire for women. Then Marie heard and came up with a brilliant idea that would help Elodie and Kabul get closer and stop being ashamed of each other. When she brought the Duke a glass of black raspberry smoothie, he was scared that something had happened to his wife, but she assured him that everything was fine with Elodie and that it would be even better if he drank what she brought him. It's impossible to describe his face when Marie told him exactly why he should drink this smoothie. He was even more surprised than his wife. At this time, the priest was arguing with Sir Theodore about how he could have done such a thing and angered the Duke. But he asked if he really fell in love with the Duchess and wanted to take her as his husband, but he remained silent. Of course, the priest was happy, but it was only to their advantage to sow enmity between the Duke and the couple. The temple had been watching over the Duchess for a long time, because they had long noticed that she was a strong magician. In addition, she is one of those who can boast of strong skills even without studying at a magic school. And if they can win her over to their side, it will be much easier for them to win the war and take the spirit power from the Duke. The priest asked Theodore if he would join their mission and lead them in subduing the Duchess, but he again did not answer. And he shouted angrily, calling them all fools who don't know that spirits shouldn't be sealed, and to subdue using divine power as help. After the death of the legendary great magician Magna Pontificia, other magicians decided to seal the power of all spirits. This was done to hide the pure power of the spirits and enhance divine power. After all, the power of spirits is the same nature, and using this power is truly raising divine power. And once the emperor finds out about this, things will become much more difficult for the temple, and Theodore does not want that to happen. Then he wondered if the high priest Amos was giving himself enough to donate to a good cause for the temple. How comforted he was when he took out a magical weapon with which he turned the servant into a lifeless force, taking away his magic. It turns out they took this powerful weapon from the kingdom of Earth when they won the war, because everyone there had a talent for creating powerful weapons. Taking it in his hands, Priest Amos vowed to take power from the Duke at all costs and seal the Duchess's power into this instrument, both the spirits and the magic of the Duchess. He wanted everything to be his, and not for the good of the temple, but for him personally and his goals. Elodie went into the garden to see how everything was growing and saw Ifrit, who said he was waiting for something tastier than peaches to grow here because she had promised. And indeed, she looked and saw nothing. Maybe this fruit takes a little longer to sprout. Then, she thought maybe it would be worth pouring a little more manna into the plant so it would have the strength to sprout faster, and she put her hands on the ground. And at that very moment, a giant strawberry bush grew in front of her. She and Ifrit were even scared, not expecting it to grow so quickly. Then Ifrit asked Elodie how much her manna had grown, that she had grown a strawberry bush with one touch of her hand. Ifrit's happiness knew no bounds. He was ready to drown in these berries, because they were so sweet. Before Elodie could say anything else, he stopped listening to her and started eating berries. But then she had an idea. She decided that she would collect more seeds from this giant strawberry and distribute them to the inhabitants of the castle. If they made it their signature product, their lands would become richer. The next day, Elodie couldn't understand which strawberry thief Ifrit was talking about. Hours before, he was crying that someone had eaten his giant strawberry and only a small one was left, but he didn't understand how it happened. He begged the Duchess to find out where his strawberries had gone, and who this scoundrel was who was eating them. She promised to find the culprit of the theft, which made Ifrit calm down a little. She smiled at him and promised that she would find a way to get her back, but she didn't really believe him, because she thought he had eaten everything himself. He also threatened that if she didn't find the thief, he wouldn't bring her any more crystals. He was angrier than she thought. The Duchess couldn't even imagine that he had eaten everything himself, and was even threatening to go on strike. He was completely impudent, but she decided to test his theory anyway and set traps around the garden, and when she checked them later, everything was in place. She just didn't notice any movement in the bushes when she returned. Elodie turned around and saw Ifrit screaming in anger because someone had eaten his strawberries again when he arrived. She promised that everything would be fine when she came to the garden, but he was angry that it wasn't, because there wasn't any now. To make sure he wasn't lying, she listened and followed him to check the bushes, and what a surprise she was. In front of her were completely empty bushes, and Ifrit wasn't lying. Someone was really stealing their berries. Elodie couldn't believe that someone had eaten everything without touching the trap, and in such a short time, but Ifrit was sure that she had eaten it herself. She was angry when she heard this nonsense. How could he even think such a thing? Now they were blaming each other. Ifrit fell to the ground and waved his paws aggressively, shouting for the strawberries to be returned to him, otherwise he would burn everything here. The girl assured him that the greenhouse was closed, and no one could enter from the street, and therefore the thief was still inside. It was then that he thought and had an idea, to check the strawberry bushes more carefully. So he stood up on his little paws and started sniffing the area without telling Elodie what was going on. At that moment, he himself was surprised by his find. He couldn't believe what he saw and felt, the smell. Something had happened to his mistress, and that something gave off the scent of unfamiliar spirits. Elodie looked at him and asked if he was okay, because she couldn't understand what he was even talking about. In the distant past, after the death of its past owner, Ifrit immersed himself in an ancient artifact and of his own free will fell into a deep sleep, and gradually fading away over the years, he reappeared in this world thanks to Elodia, but after learning that the kings of the spirits of water, wind, and earth had long since sealed away the 5 priests of Tessera. And since then, when he woke up, he didn't see any other spirits, because all the kings had been sealed away, so he thought that all the other spirits had died out. But now Elodie was smelling something, a very strong scent of perfume he had never smelled from her before. And she still stood there, looking at the spirit in fear, not understanding what he was whispering about, or why he was so excited. And he looked at her and couldn't believe that this young girl had given birth to powerful spirits. Spirits are born in the powerful force of nature, and this greenhouse is a place where she put a lot of her own energy and time into. And because there was a huge amount of mana and the use of crystals, the birth of spirits here doesn't seem so strange. And it was at this moment that Ifrit jumped into the bushes and opened them, finding these scoundrels eating his strawberry patch. 3 frightened spirits sat hugging each other and trembling with fear. They were still very small. Elodie asked if these were Ifrit's friends, and he got angry and said that they were not his friends. And those spirits he found were low in rank. In the past, priests sealed spirits to improve the value of divine power. It seems the spirits sensed the Duchess's friendliness and immediately jumped into her arms, feeling her warmth. Ifrit hoped that he would never see them again in his life and that he was the only one like them, but her pure power merged with the elements of the crystals, and that's how they appeared. Elodie asked if they didn't talk because they were still little, but Ifrit smiled and said no, because they were stupid. The spirits began to make sounds, and Elodie said that he had angered them, and Ifrit asked in surprise if she could understand them too. And the power of spirits depends on where they were born, so these little ones may not be so badly charged with power. But he flew up and shouted that no one could compare to the king of spirits, Ifrit, praising himself. And he was also happy that they had finally caught the thieves and advised them to punish them so that they would never eat his strawberries again. At that moment, he rushed at them to fight and force them to return his strawberries. Kabul was walking around the castle in search of his wife and guessed where to look for her, so he headed to her greenhouse. He was in an incredible mood, remembering last night. Elodie fell asleep and didn't notice how she ended up in his arms, snuggling closer to keep warm. And so that she wouldn't freeze, he covered her with a blanket and pulled her even closer to him, for which she hugged him tightly in the spring. And he decided that if his wife hugged him herself, Then he came to hug her too. As soon as he opened the door, joyfully calling out to his wife, a strange situation arose before him. The Duke's mouth opened wide. He shouted, "What's going on here?" His wife smiled, hugging the strange creatures, and Ifrit threw bad words in their direction. He came closer and stood behind her, asking what she was holding in her hands. Then, even Ifrit got scared and hid behind her. These cute animals even made him smile, although he was worried because he still didn't understand where she got them. Elodie let go of her spirits and boasted to her husband that she had finally caught the thieves who had been stealing their strawberries. The kids immediately ran up to Kabil because they also felt that he was friendly. It seems that Kabil has started to get even more jealous. The number of creatures his wife loves has increased even more. Elodie smiled and told the kids that if they ate so many strawberries, they would now have to work it off in return.